All right, it's 10:46. Are we ready to resume? Okay.
Okay. Do you want
Susan back? Do we need to wait for Susan to return? There she is. All right. So our next agenda item is the discussion and possible recommendation of amendments to clarify telehealth laws for associates and trainees. Um, Roseanne, do you have?
Yes.
All right.
All right. So I'm going to go through this. There's 3 attachments to this, each with a different set of language changes. So just for clarity, I'm going to go through this one by one for discussion, and then stop after each set of proposed amendments. And I do think that in light of Camp's letter, that there is a possibility that some of these amendments might need a little bit more thought because they fit into a bigger issue or a sub issue. So I'll point that out where I see it, and then of course the stakeholders can weigh in on their thoughts as well. So of course, we've learned due to the COVID state of emergency that there's lots of areas in our law that in the light of COVID and how things are changed, they either need some clarification or maybe the board should possibly consider making some modifications. So we're doing that here, and this portion is clarifying the specific telehealth law regarding associates and trainees. So I'm going to start with associates in telehealth. MFT law is very clear. It states that MFT associates and MFT trainees, it explicitly states that they're permitted to practice via telehealth under supervision. Of course, the supervisor needs to make sure that they're following their supervisor responsibilities to ensure good practice. But if those things are done, then they are explicitly permitted to perform services via telehealth. It says that in a couple of places. It says that in MFT law in section 4980.43.3I, and it also says that in Business and Professions Code 2290.5, where it's defined that healthcare provider is defined. It specifically mentions MFT associates and trainees. So ASWs and APCCs are permitted to perform services via telehealth, but it's not explicitly stated. It's implied, and you really need to know the law to be able to make that interpretation. That's because Business and Professions Code section 23.8 states that when the Business and Professions Code uses the term licensees, it's also referring to registrants. But the average person wouldn't know that if they're trying to look at the law and make a conclusion. So it's not very clear. But because of that, associates are permitted, APCCs and ASWs are permitted to do via telehealth. We are pursuing an amendment in this year's omnibus bill, SB 801, to include ASWs and APCCs in the definition of a healthcare provider who may provide services via telehealth in Business and Professions Code 2290.5. So if and when 801 is signed, which we're hoping any day now, then that will become clear in 2290.5. However, MFTs also have that in their specific practice act that associates can do telehealth. So what I'm recommending in attachment A is a specific amendment to Business and Professions Code 4996.23.2K for LCSWs and 4999.46.43J for LPCCs, that they may do services via telehealth. And this corresponds with the exact LMFT law that already exists. So I don't see any issues with moving forward this change at this time. And so I would open that piece up for discussion now.
So this is really for clarification.
Yes.
Yes, because of, how the LCSW and the LPCC law, are silent about practicing telehealth. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think this is fine, clarifying, make it clear.
I feel the same.
I agree.
All right. Do we want to move on, or do we want to open that for public discussion?
I think we can probably go through all of them and then know, how many do we have, Roseanne?
Not very many. There's about 4 times that I'm
Okay,
gonna stop.
yeah, let's go through it and then we'll open up for public discussion.
Okay. So the next item that I want to tackle is trainees in telehealth, because trainees are a little bit different than associates. The law does not specifically address whether social work interns or professional clinical counselor trainees can provide services via telehealth. They are not presumably included in the definition of a licensee in business and professions 23.8 like associates are, because they are not under the jurisdiction of the board yet. They're not registered with the board at all. They're under the jurisdiction of their school. So that doesn't, the same thing, what I just talked about with associates doesn't apply to trainees. However, MFT law already states in 2 places, 2290.5 and 4980.43.3, that trainees can do services via telehealth. So it's clarified for MFT trainees. But the law is silent on the issue for social work interns and PCC trainees. And one difference is, unlike MFT trainees who can count pre-degree hours, social work interns and PCC trainees are not permitted to count pre-degree hours. So their supervision requirements are a little bit less stringent, because they do not have to use a supervisor that necessarily meets all of the board's specific qualifications, a license for 2 years, been a supervisor or a practice for 2 of the past 5 years. The supervisor requirements are a little bit different. But given that MFT trainees are explicitly permitted to provide services via telehealth, and that the school has some discretion on overseeing their PCC trainees, we are proposing to amend Business and Professions Code section 2295.5 to specify that professional clinical counselor trainees may provide services via telehealth. And also, we are proposing to amend the LPCC law to correspond with MFT law, that trainees can perform services via telehealth. Now, I do want to note that NESW California has asked us that a similar clarification for social work interns not be made. This is because social work schools a lot of times have their own policies, and they really like to keep social work interns out of a lot of specific things in the law. Their law is really very different than, because they have a national accrediting agency that their schools must go by, whereas the other 2 license types don't. Historically, we have not specified as much for social work students in school as we have for the other 2 license types. So that is what we're proposing for the PCC trainees only. One other amendment that we're proposing in attachment A is amendments to Business and Professions Code section 4980.42 in LMFT law and 4999.36, which is LPCC law, that would basically state trainee experience via telehealth is at the discretion of the school and the site. Now, given Camp's letter, I think that it's possible we might want to hold off on this a little bit, because I think that we are going to have a more holistic discussion in this committee about trainees and telehealth and the sites that they can be doing telehealth from and things like that. So it's open for discussion, but I do see their point that that particular amendment so those 2 sections may be a little bit premature, so we can discuss that as well. So I'll open that up for discussion.
Okay, so I guess my question is, and I think I know the answer. So we don't have jurisdiction over the trainees. That's simply the programs. So the purpose of this really is to just kind of say, hey, we want to make sure that that the training programs understand that they're responsible for the oversight of their trainees. Okay. I think it sounds great. Obviously, I would want the input from you know, the trainers and how they feel about that. But that seems to make sense to me.
Okay.
Any other comments? No? Okay.
Trainees is always fun because they really know within our jurisdiction, and yet that oftentimes I think the education institution or supervisors look to the BBS for guidelines. So I think for that clarification is good, so that they know that they are the one who has the discretion. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks. We're ready to move on?
Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to discuss is practicum. And so should the board determine that all trainees may provide services via telehealth, a question arises about the face-to-face practicum hours required as part of the degree programs leading to LMFT and LPCC licensure. And this is another area where I think that further discussion may be warranted. So that the committee may want to consider that. So the amendment proposes that we remove the word face-to-face in terms of the practicum requirements. So right now, for example, MFTs, trainees, let me flip to that page just really quick. MFT trainees are required to get 150 hours of face-to-face experience counseling individuals, couples, families, or groups. LPCCs have to have 280 hours. So the law specifically uses the word face-to-face, and during COVID, it's really come into question what that was intended to mean. We're interpreting face-to-face as meaning in person or via video conferencing. We did clarify that in a waiver just to be extra safe, but face-to-face, typically it's thought to imply in person or via video conferencing. At the last meeting, it was suggested we just delete face-to-face. It should be pointed out that if you delete that, then it also becomes other forms of telehealth, like telephone would be acceptable. So again, there might be more discussion that needs to happen on this. So depending on how the committee feels about moving forward, I will open that up for discussion.
I think as we stated before, where the trainees are kind of under the discretion of the training programs. I would really want to hear from the trainers about how they feel about it. We want to we want things to be more clear, but we also don't want any foreseen problems that arise either. So I'd like to hear more from the trainers.
Yes, I agree.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Roseanne. Go ahead. Next.
All right. And then finally, with attachment C, and this is really just, I think, a technical cleanup, LCSW experience hours. ASWs are required by law to obtain at least 750 face-to-face individual or group psychotherapy hours in the context of clinical social work services. So the committee might want to discuss what the reasoning behind the word face-to-face is in there. Staff believes that the main intent of this sentence is to ensure that ASWs gain a specific amount of experience hours directly related to clinical social work. But the way as telehealth became more prevalent, the use of the term face-to-face in that particular section has started to raise questions and cause some confusion about what that means. Can it be in person? Does it have to be in person? Can it be via in-person or video conferencing, which is how we're interpreting it right now? Does it really matter if it's over the telephone? So given that associates are already permitted to perform services via telehealth, and it's at the discretion of the supervisor, really, staff recommends in this particular case striking the term face-to-face in this sentence. I think it can be struck because we're making clarifications elsewhere in law that experience hours gained by associates are really at the discretion of the supervisor. So unless the board wants to make a specific exception for certain groups of hours to be face-to-face for associates, I don't believe it's necessary to affirmatively state how each type of associate experience hours must be gained. We have run this change by NESW California, and they have indicated that they are on board with it. So with that, I will open it up for discussion.
If they're on board with it, then that they're the ones that are in the trenches. So if they're on board with it, then I don't see any reason to argue it.
And also the most important thing too, the associates are under supervision. So if there's anything that, so there's one layer, that the supervisor are kind of like responsible for them, to a certain extent. So I think that's, the appropriateness, how those 750 hours or more, needs to be accumulated, it's kind of at the discretion, of the supervisor. So I think that, and also I think in the exam setting, telehealth is permitted anyway. And so there's not really that much reason for us to, to put a, more stringent stipulation, for those ASWs to gain their, the types of the hours that they should be gaining. So so I'm good with that. And I think last time that Roseanne did some really good research, to see if there's any unintended consequences, and the answer is no. And so I think I feel comfortable, to move forward with that, deleting that face to face.
All right. Any other comments? No. Okay. Thank you, Roseanne. Was that the end?
Well, we need to open it up to public discussion, and then once we do that, we can kind of revisit and see which particular attached changes in the attachments that the committee would like to move forward to the policy and advocacy committee meeting.
Right. No, I just meant was that the end of your
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And I really appreciate all the research and hard work that you do on this. It's great. So with that, moderator, if we could open it up to public comment.
This is the moderator. At the direction of the chair, I've opened the Q&A feature of WebEx. We're sharing information on the screen. If you'd like to make a public comment on the agenda item of amendments to clarify telehealth laws for associates and trainees, please click on the Q&A icon, the question mark inside a box, typically in the lower right corner. Or if you're on a mobile device, you can click on the 3-dot other options icon to find the Q&A button. Type the word comment and hit send. You will have 2 minutes to speak. And we do have a raised hand from Jennifer Alley. Jennifer, I will request that you unmute your microphone, and then you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Almost afternoon. This is Jennifer Alley with Camped again. And we do have some serious reservations about removing the face-to-face requirement. We agree and hear your conversation that trainees aren't under the jurisdiction of the board, but it's my understanding that the schools rely on the board for their degree requirements and some direction on how the board wants people to be educated and trained to ensure consumer protection. In the last item, in the prior discussion, it was going to be, telehealth training would be at the discretion of the school, or a CE requirement moving forward as a discussion item in the policy and advocacy committee. And now we're talking about removing the face-to-face requirement. And so when CAMP, submitted our letter and wanted to have a pause, we want there to be clear direction for education and training and how the next generation of clinicians are going to be trained. And if you remove face-to-face out, let's not talk about, COVID and the confusion with the waivers and what was required. We're talking about policy and making changes to statute for the future. So we're going to table that. We're not talking about COVID. We're talking about the future. And we're talking about, do we want to have, clinician requirements to be of experience requirements face to face with another human when they're providing therapy. And so when we talk about removing a minimal 150 hours for face to face experience, we have a series, we want to have a very serious and thoughtful, longer conversation of what, fully trained clinicians' skill set should be in the future.
15 seconds.
And so we would appreciate, a pause on this issue for marriage and family therapists. Thank you.
And our next commenter is Representative Benjamin Caldwell. Benjamin, I will send a request to unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to speak. Oops, one moment. My apologies. And Benjamin, I've sent you a request.
Ben Caldwell, MFT. I appreciate the discussion on this, and Roseanne, all of your good work on the topic. I kind of land in the same place that Jen Alley and the folks at Camp do. A little bit of a different route to get there. I'm less concerned about phone interaction in terms of its viability as telehealth experience. I'm more concerned about what removing that face-to-face language would potentially allow in terms of other forms of both synchronous and asynchronous interaction to count as potential experience. There are the chat-based therapy platforms that are growing in scope, and there's also, there are those clinicians who engage in clinical work via email and other forms of sort of asynchronous communication. So there's a lot to be unpacked here. And for that reason, I think it's probably a good idea to make this a longer and more thoughtful process where we can integrate a little bit more of the underlying research as well as more stakeholder input in setting a framework that will really be resilient over time as technology continues to change and adapt. Thank you.
All right. And the next request for public comment is from Kathy Atkins. Kathy, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, I got it to turn off this time. This is Kathy Atkins with Camp. Thank you for letting me comment. I want to just add on to Jen and Ben Caldwell's comments. I highlight and underscore Jen's comments about the concern about taking away any requirement that a provider, and I certainly can't and won't speak for NSAW or CalPIC, but I'm talking about providers generally, not just necessarily MFTs, but to have licensed providers who have never been in a room with a human being. I think that is a concern of ours without substantial more discussion. I mean, as Jen pointed out, we just talked about the requirement that people learn telehealth, but yet we're now discussing getting rid of a requirement that they learn how to be in a room with a client. That's incredibly concerning without substantially more input from stakeholders, not just schools, but supervisors, agencies, schools, licensed providers. And I am very concerned about unintended consequences of removing this so quickly without, Ben brought up things that I frankly hadn't even occurred to me. So, when you rush legislation, sweeping legislation that impacts the consumer and frankly the prestige and quality of a license, you end up with unintended consequences that are very difficult to sort of unring a bell.
15 seconds.
So I just really want to emphasize our concern about, we do support trainees doing telehealth, but the face-to-face has me concerned for providers. Thank you.
And the next request for public comment is from Rebecca Gonzalez. Rebecca, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Hello, this is Rebecca Gonzalez with the National Association of Social Workers California chapter. I just want to confirm that on the first part of this section, which was just clarifying the proposed amendments in attachment A, that we were fine with that. I don't think let's see. I also want to confirm that we did not want social work interns in the next section that we talk about in trainees and telehealth, confirming that conversation or that correspondence with Roseanne. I will not comment on the, LMFT or LPCC sections. And then the last section on the face-to-face requirement, I agree that this probably was put in there originally to say that experience hours must be directly related to clinical social work. But I also, I kind of wonder how this interacts with the other section on LMFTs and LPCCs, and maybe it does warrant further discussion. Thank you.
And our next request for public comment comes from Jordan Bowler. Jordan, I will send a request to unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Hello. I appreciate that the original, at least inclination from what I can read of the NASW there was to be on the side of increasing access to treatment and ability to become a licensed provider. I'm not sure why anyone would be on the side of there being less access. In general, I think that what's going to change moving forward is the pandemic or not. The modality of how therapy is provided on a large scale is different, and I don't want to be on the wrong side of history here. So if there's some discomfort for the MFTs and the LPCCs and the NASW is okay for social workers, I'm okay with that. I think it makes sense to include the language more as a recommendation than a requirement, because including it as a requirement or keeping it as a requirement means that someone that doesn't have access to it for whatever reason can't complete their degree. And I don't think that that's good for anybody, because I think telehealth services are just as valuable and valid as in-person services all around. So I don't really think it's fair to force people to do things like that.
And I see no further requests for public comment. Shall I close the feature?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, comments from the board? Susan?
Only thing that I am a little bit concerned about is that while we know COVID will be with us forever, it's going to be with us forever like the flu. I mean, we're not going to live the lives that we've been living forever because of COVID, because it's just going to be a disease that's out there that you might get. So I'm a little bit concerned about how we write this so that people think that telehealth is the only way they're going to be practicing in some way, and that they're never going to be in the room with a client or patient. I mean, I don't know if I'm making myself clear on that, but Roseanne, do you think that there's, you're muted.
I think I understand what you're saying, Susan. I think you want to kind of look at the world post-pandemic and kind of, I think what you're saying, kind of what I think along the lines of some of the stakeholders said, is that, that there might be a value to both types, not just assuming that somebody's going to only be doing doing telehealth, that, you know, we need to consider in person too. And I think that's why with attachment B and C, that there might need to be a little bit more thought put into that. You know, before we go deleting the face-to-face. I think that what you're saying is kind of along the lines of that, is that, you know, people might need to know how to do both. Is that accurate?
Yes.
I actually really super appreciate, you know, the stakeholders, you know, want to have that very thoughtful process, you know, and a very thoughtful discussion, you know, by just taking away that three words, face to face, and what really it means. And so, and I also want to appreciate Ben, you know, just reminding us that, you know, that COVID or telehealth, you know, the evolution, you know, is not just about, you know, the conventional video conferencing anymore. It's about, it can be about chat, it can be about, you know, email, it can be about, you know, whatever, Snapchat or whatever. And so not to, you know, not to make, you know, advertisement for whatever social media company, but, you know, I think that is a really important thing, you know. So, you know, you know, what I'm hearing is that, you know, the stakeholders are really, you know, not wanting to have any change for the face to face. Basically, that would be like the number 3 and the number 4. And so I think, you know, I'm for it. You know, I think, you know, sometimes no change is a good thing, you know, because it gets, you know, it buys us some time. And also, you know, really also look at, you know, for us to slow down and see what the, you know, and kind of like make some good prediction, you know, what the world is going to look like down the road. Because I think we are having some sort of like, you know, existential crisis, you know, to a certain extent, because, you know, the old traditional way of you come to the office, you sit down with the mental health professional and talk about your issue. You know, now that, you know, that's the old way. You know, the new way is like it can happen in a chat room, it can happen in, you know, in your own bedroom, it can happen in the car, you know. So it's like I think there are just so much things changing, and so I think we really need to respect, you know, that you know, that's you know, the you know, how things are going to roll down the, you know, down the hill. And so I think, you know, not changing the word face to face, I think that would definitely keep that status quo. Give us some time, you know, to look at what, you know, what it means, you know, and making sure that, you know, that's you know, continue to examine, you know, what the you know, what the implication is compared to the trend of the mental health you know, services, and, you know, making sure that we still, you know, are able to train, you know, the next group of the licensees and be able to provide the competent mental health services. I think that really is the point. And so no change is a good thing. So, you know, so I'm hearing that, you know, basically, you know, I don't hear any, you know, opposition, you know, for the first and the second, you know, to clarify, you know, the language. So I think, you know, that's kind of my take, you know. So I don't know about you, Chris. What do you think? I'm okay for not removing the word face to face for 3 and 4.
I think our stakeholders are loud and clear about that, and I agree as a, you know, trainer myself that, you know, it's important to have them in the room with you. So yeah, no, I'm okay with that. So Roseanne, you want to give us your summary?
Yes. So in summary, I'm hearing that let's table attachment B and C for now. So table attachment B and C, and then the discussion moves to A. Now, I think A is pretty straightforward. The first 2 parts of A are straightforward. We're just clarifying 2 sections, but we're basically saying that associate clinical social workers can do telehealth, and we're amending the law to say that LPCCs and LPCC trainees can do telehealth, and that's in line with what's already in the LMFT law. So I think that is fine. What I want to like just double check is that there's another amendment to MFT law under trainees services 4980.42. We're proposing putting in some language that the school and the site shall assess the appropriateness of allowing a trainee to gain any hours of experience via telehealth. Making the assessment, the school and site shall take into account such factors as the ability of the trainee and the appropriateness of telehealth for the client. So my question would be, and that would be for LMFTs trainees and LPCC trainees. My question, I guess, to the committee and to stakeholders is it premature for that language, or are we comfortable with that language moving forward?
Comments?
I think I'm okay with, with the language in attachment A. I mean, it's really about just clarifying. And so, make it, not silent and not confusing because it cross-reference to all these different, part of the language. So when you have one place, in their practice law, I think that is actually wonderful.
I agree. Would we open it up to public comment again? Would that be appropriate? Yes, okay. Let's do that then. Can we open up, moderator, can we open it up to public comment, please?
Certainly. At the request of the chair, I've opened the Q&A feature of WebEx. If you'd like to make a public comment on this item, the section A of the possible recommendations of amendments to clarify telehealth laws for associates and trainees. You could look for the question mark inside a box icon in your WebEx, and we will take comments in the order received. You will have 2 minutes to speak. I see a request for comment from Kathy Atkins. Kathy, I will send you a request to unmute, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, thank you, Kathy Atkins. CAMT is generally in favor of trainees being able to do telehealth. And so on the face of it, we don't have any concerns with that amendment. I suppose, given the conversation we just had, I want to put into the atmosphere that, depending on how the conversation went with face-to-face, this might need to be revisited, but CAMT is absolutely in support of trainees being able to do telehealth generally. So I hope that provides the input Roseanne was looking for.
And our next commenter is Benjamin Caldwell. Benjamin, I will send a request to unmute your microphone, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Good morning. Ben Caldwell, MFT, and just wanted to second that what's in attachment A seems pretty clear, straightforward, non-controversial. No reason why that couldn't move forward. Thank you.
And Jennifer Alley has requested comment. Jennifer, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone, and you will have 2 minutes.
Hi, yes, thank you. I'd like to obviously echo Kathy's comments. My only question about the effective date of this this amendment is, does the date need to be discussed, considering the training requirement was delayed until July 1, 2023, and this says January 1, 2023, to ensure that the training occurs, unless you're just going to rely on the supervisor's discretion. So I just pose that as a comment to the board, and appreciate the opportunity and the discussions today. Thank you.
And there are no further requests for public comment. Shall I close the feature?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So
I'll
I
think-
have a question then, so I think Jen brought a really good question. So in terms of the implementation, then, what would that anticipate to be?
So my comment on that would be, this is kind of a clarifying amendment. So yeah, we want them to have the training. We want people to make sure they're competent, but really the amendment is clarifying for the schools that they can do this, and they need to make sure they do an assessment. My concern about putting a delayed implementation date in on that is it might imply that trainees can't do telehealth at all right now until that course requirement goes into effect. And I wouldn't want to imply that. I think that could cause a lot of, you know, we are addressing it moving forward. They are going to have the coursework at some point, but there is a phase in, like we can't do it immediately. But I think that it's still important to provide the guidance because the law allows them to do telehealth. But this is sort of a warning that, hey, schools, yeah, you can, you know, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're taking into account all the appropriate factors first. So it's more clarifying to the schools than prescriptive or making a new requirement. It's just kind of stemming from the fact that during COVID, we had a lot of questions from schools if the law prohibited it, and we would say, you know, no, the law does not. The law says training, at least for MFTs, the law says, you know, permits trainees to do telehealth, but you know, here's some things you need to think of in terms of the appropriateness for the client. You know, whether your trainee who's a brand new practitioner is ready to do it. So it's just kind of trying to get them to think of those things as their responsibility.
Right. So it means that the implementation date, you know, really shouldn't have any negative effect, you know, on people who are on the training and or the supervisor. Actually, it's helpful, you know, even for them to, you know, to know that trainee and you know, the trainees are allowed, you know, to do, you know, telehealth.
Right. I think it would cause a lot of confusion if we delayed that particular piece about the school's assessment, because it would imply then they might feel like, well, they're not. So,
yeah.
And they are allowed to do it, but in a perfect world, we could put that course requirement in right away, and it would all be good, and everybody would have it. But since it hasn't been a requirement in the past, it's one of those things where we have to give them some time, I think.
Okay. So I think I'm ready to make a motion.
You have a motion?
I think the motion, clarify if it's wrong, is to direct staff to make any discuss amendments on attachment A and any substantive amendments and bring to the policy and advocacy committee for consideration.
Any non-substantive amendments, yes.
Yes. So Sabina, is my motion okay? Sabina.
Hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I had to change microphones again. It seems to kick me off my microphone if I don't use it. I stated that you are good to go. Roseanne corrected that one minor misstatement in the motion to non-substantive changes, and you're all good to go. And
yes,
to move this along. Thanks.
Thank you. Yay. It's nice to get it right.
All right, so the motion's been made.
Second.
And a second.
All right. 2 seconds. Can we take the vote?
I didn't hear a second. Did anyone second that?
Susan seconded.
Oh, okay, I didn't hear her. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so here's the vote. Susan Friedman,
Yes.
Chris Jones,
Yes.
Christina Wong,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right. Okay, now we're ready to move on to our next agenda item. Agenda item number 7, which is discussion and possible recommendation of amendments regarding supervision via video conferencing. All right, Roseanne.
Yes. So this discussion will focus on whether supervision via video conferencing should continue to be allowed only in exempt settings, or if it should also be allowed in all other settings. So right now, the law as written, during normal times when we don't have waivers and states of emergency, the law only allows supervision via video conferencing in exempt settings. There was a waiver during COVID that allowed supervision via video conferencing in all settings. We have gotten indication from the department yesterday that waiver will be ending on October 31st. We are waiting to make that announcement until we get official wording and language from the department, but it's sounding like that as of October 31st, that waiver will no longer be in effect. So the law, we want to consider how we want the law to look moving forward. We are making a law change under AB 690, which is hopefully going to be signed by the governor any day. We'll see. That right now the law only explicitly permits associates working in an exempt setting to obtain supervision via video conferencing. We're changing associates in 690 to supervisees, but that's only going to clarify so far. You know, if supervision via video conferencing is going to be allowed in any form in non-exempt settings, a law change is needed. So the committee had directed staff to conduct surveys of trainees, associates, schools, and supervisors to get their feedback on supervision via video conferencing. So as I alluded to earlier, those survey results are shown in the meeting materials. And at the last meeting, the committee directed staff to draft 2 potential sets of amendments regarding supervision via video conferencing. We have in attachment A, option 1, which is a 50% in-person supervision required. And then option 2, which is supervision via video conferencing is allowed with the first meeting required to be in person. That's attachment B. So in looking at option 1, it does a few things. Option 1 is the 50% in-person supervision required option. It clarifies that face-to-face direct supervisor contact means either in person or via 2-way real-time video conferencing. It continues to allow supervisees working in an exempt setting to obtain their supervision via video conferencing with no limit at all, as per current law. And then it permits supervisees working in a non-exempt setting to obtain up to 50% of their required supervisor hours per supervisor per month to be via video conferencing. So that's option 1. Option 2 does the following. It also clarifies that face-to-face direct supervisor contact means either in person or via 2-way real-time video conferencing. It requires that a supervisor must conduct an initial in-person meeting with a supervisee before initiating direct supervision. And that's for all settings, exempt and non-exempt. And then it requires that during that in-person initial meeting, the supervisor needs to assess the appropriateness of allowing the supervisee to gain experience hours via telehealth and the appropriateness of the supervisee to receive supervision via video conferencing and to document those findings. There's a long list of items. If the committee decides to pursue option 2, there's some questions that we need to go through, much like we did earlier in this meeting for one of our options. But I won't do that right at the second because I think we should discuss option 1 versus option 2 first. I've given you in the meeting materials some kind of a sampling of what other states are doing right now regarding supervision via video conferencing. There's also a link to a summary, a state-by-state summary of other states' laws, if anybody wants to see the further research on that. But I would want to state that in light of this discussion, it has a lot of implications for other things. So there are some potentials for unintended consequences that I think really need to be considered. There's implications for what settings this allows people to practice in. You know, the committee needs to have a discussion at a later on meeting about, you know, where trainees and associates should be practicing from. And that includes like out of their home or out of, you know, wherever in California. And then it also has implications for out of state practice too. There's a lot of national corporations that I think would like to do exclusive supervision via video conferencing. So that raises implications. Not only should an associate be practicing from their house exclusively, but also, you know, should an associate outside of California in another state or another country be permitted to do so permanently? Should their supervisor also be able to supervise them remotely 100%? So there's all of these questions that really kind of need a deep dive because there's a lot of potential consequences Whereas in the past, the sort of in-person supervision requirement really ensured that, that there was an office pretty much and that the supervisee was practicing out of that and seeing their supervisor sometimes. So just want you to keep in mind those particular points that I've outlined when having this discussion, given the public protection mandate of the board. So with that, I will open it up for further discussion.
Susan?
I'm unclear, Roseanne. I should know this, but I don't. What is the waiver that is ending? You said October 30th or something.
31st. The waiver is the the waiver that supervision must be. We had a waiver that was allowing supervision via video conferencing in all settings. It was waiving the requirement basically that if you're a non-exempt setting under regular law, supervision has to be in person. During COVID, it was all allowed via video conferencing.
Okay, so basically, if you're going to, what you're saying is if you're in a non-exempt setting, you have to be there in the room together.
When you're doing the supervision, meeting your supervisor, yes.
Yes. Okay, I wanted to understand that. Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
you're correct.
Can I say something, Chris?
Of course.
How can you stop me from saying something, right?
I wouldn't even try.
I need to try not to say anything. Anyway, so, so I think this is, I've been thinking about this one, for a while. And so, especially knowing that, the waiver is extended for just another month. And it's for the length of time, it tells me that, there's a very good chance that it may not be renewed anymore, which also means that by November 1st, everything back to normal, which means that everybody, all the supervisor should be meeting with, the supervisee face to face, except unless you're in the exam setting. That's a different, story. And so, so I think, and I really hear the association, saying it loud and clear too, and the need to have a very, very thoughtful process. So, and I love that. And, that's kind of like in my last, 10 and a half years, it's really trying to, with BBS, it's really trying to have a good conversation with the stakeholders and, because they are the one, who really bring the, professional ideas, to us and really help us shape, the legislation. And so I think, I like to throw a metaphor out there, so we know that, it's like there's a train leaving, and we're not prepared. So the question is that should we stay put, let the train go, right? Which is like, our opportunity to, make some regulation changes, or should we just pack up something and just like, we know that we're not ready, but at least we're getting on the train, for the next, to get on the legislative cycle to make something happen, to actually bring something on the board. So I think, the more like to me, the discussion is, should we change or should we not change? And if we decide to change, is what option that we would be going for? It sounds like, it's kind of a like little deja vu, moment, that, oh, that, yeah, that's, where are we at now? It seems like we're, kind of like back to the square one. But it seems to me that that is the direction, where we're going. Should we actually make changes? If not, then we don't have to do anything. Because, we know that the old law work, by November 1st, it's fine, everything back to normal, back to where we were before, and yet, if we want to introduce legislative change, yes, things will be back to normal, but there's also a chance that things might be different by January 1st, 2023. Is that timing is correct, right? Right, Roseanne? Yeah.
Yes.
And so I think that is, so the difference will be if we, try to make some, changes now, then the soonest we can see the change happen will be January 1st, 2023. If not, then we missed the opportunity. Then the change might happen as late as January 1st, 2024. I think that is the kind of like the view of me. So I'm fine either way, So, personally, as a clinical supervisor, I find it very hard, to do group supervision on video. And my my supervisor can tell you, since I have so many jokes, I told them is that I'm not, when I was running supervised clinical supervision session, in a group, I'm kind of becoming a dentist because I have to pull teeth, to get those supervisors to talk. So so it's not like, when in person, it's very different. And so I like the in person. I really, really do. And I think, that warrants, a lot more that, in terms of how we, the quality of the supervision, the observation, of the supervisor to the supervisee. And it's not just about like, about like the physical cues and whatnot, but really it's like, I think when we talk about like the core of the supervision, which is to deal with, their the transference and the counter transference, just being able to observe them face to face is important, and I think the clinical supervisor, also have the ethical, and legal responsibility to make sure that, the client, the supervisor is, also practicing legally. So how do you guarantee that, that they didn't take a big sip of vodka, before they walk into our clinical session? Many things that video conferencing won't be able to accomplish, and so to me it's like I think that portion, the portion of very closely supervising them in person is important. That's why it's like I'm not a fan of option B. There's just like, you know open up that big floodgate, for the flexibility that you cannot, get back. And also we know that, that an average time, of the for a person, for associate to get a license is about 3.3 to 3.5 years. I think that was like, what the research said. So for within that 3 years that you're not seeing that person, how do you closely supervise them? If supervisor is kind of like a long-term relationship, will long distance relationship the same as, you meeting them, with them every week? I mean, it's that's just I think that's why I am not a big fan of, the option B, if we come to wanting to change. So yeah, I said many things, many directions at the background, and and hopefully that will also evoke some discussion. So, Chris, back to you.
This is a lively topic. Um, Roseanne, so I can get some clarification just on a couple of things. The waiver that's ending at the end of the month, is there any chance that that's going to be extended, or is that a done deal?
I have not gotten anything official in writing yet, but we did have a meeting yesterday, and it sounds like any further extensions are very highly unlikely.
All right. So regardless of what happens, we're most likely going back to business as usual by November 1st. Okay.
Yes.
So another just clarifying question for me, like when we're looking at option one, so it really the face-to-face or in-person piece of the supervision really mostly applies um, to non-exempt settings. If you're in an exempt setting, they'll still be able to do video conferencing supervision. Is that how I'm reading that correctly?
Yes,
Okay.
that is
So,
correct.
so this will impact mostly like private practices.
Yes, private practices, anything that doesn't quite fall under anything that's basically not an exempt setting. So might not be exactly a private practice. It could be like a treatment center or something like that. Not maybe somebody hanging up a shingle, but it's not a government agency. It's not a school. So it's kind of
Right.
what we call everything else.
Okay. All right. So then option one would require those settings to be 50% face-to-face. The other 50% being video conferencing would be an option. Minimum. They could do 100% face-to-face if they wanted, but they could do up to 50. And option two is the same thing, other than we're requiring everyone across the board, regardless of setting, to have at least one face-to-face.
everyone across the board, regardless of setting, would have to have the initial in-person meeting. And then it could be, if they wanted, all video.
Okay. And then after that, it could be, both settings could be all video. Is that correct?
Yes, both types of setting. If under option 2, it would be exempt settings and non-exempt settings. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm on the fence with both, personally on the fence with both. I agree with Christina on many levels. You know, as a supervisor, you know, being in the room with, I mean, with your supervisee is much different than being on the camera with them. I currently have a really good mix of both in person and video, so it's a lot different because we have that established relationship. You know, so yeah, I'm on the fence with it. I see the value to both. I also remember all of the discussion regarding accessibility for you know, for supervision to happen, and all of the things that get in the way of those trying to access. So okay, I'm waffling, so I'll let either Susan, if you have anything to say, it's your turn. Otherwise, we'll open it up to public comment.
Well, the only thing that I have to say is that I think some face-to-face is required. And since we're talking here about mostly people in private practice in non-exempt settings, I would definitely support the opening meeting to be in person, because we're moving towards a non-pandemic life. We're moving away from all of these rules that we followed during the pandemic. I mean, we're hopefully moving to a non-pandemic life. And so I definitely am in favor of at least one person-to-person meeting. I'm anxious to know what the different associations feel about that. Feel about person-to-person in general.
I'm sure that that they're going to chime in. I think that the survey was pretty clear that you know, there was a lot of people that were in favor of doing video supervision, you know, anywhere from 75% to 100% of the time. At least that was my takeaway from the survey results and all the information. So okay, with that being said, moderator, if you would open the Q&A. Thank you.
And this is the moderator. At the direction of the chair, I've opened up the Q&A feature. We are sharing instructions on the screen. If you'd like to make a public comment on this agenda item, the amendments regarding supervision via video conferencing, please click on the question mark icon in the lower right corner of your screen, and we will take comments in the order received. We do have one request for comment from Jordan Bowler. And Jordan, I have sent a request for you to unmute your microphone, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. I want to again make people aware that the ending of the waiver and not adopting some sort of change will put a lot of thousands and thousands of people that are currently receiving supervision long distance within the state. That destroys the supervisory relationship and forces them to find something new in a time where that's not really necessary. I also want to make people aware that there are thousands and thousands of clinicians that intend to stay virtual and do not intend to go back into the office, because at least I can speak for myself. I've found doing therapy from my home to be a lot more effective, and I found people to be a lot more comfortable doing it in their homes that I'm working with. So to assume that everyone is interested in moving, going back to doing things in person would be to assume incorrectly. I really think it's sad and backwards that we're looking at forcing people to do things in person. I think we're dragging against the future here. And I don't think it's worth it. I think being able to make physical contact with someone has no relevance to supervision. I can read facial expressions, and I've never had any issue getting engagement from my supervisees. I think that's more of a personal thing. I encourage that to be up to the preference of the supervisor. But again, I don't know why would we be on the side of restricting access and making it so fewer people can get supervised and licensed. Why would that be the
15
way?
seconds.
I'm baffled here. This is really upsetting.
Okay. And the next request is from Benjamin Caldwell. Benjamin, I will send a request to unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
You want me to follow that? I'm Ben Caldwell, MFT. And I say that because I largely agree. I think that putting a high level of restriction on after 18 months of online supervision working really, really well, I'm sad and backwards is strong language, and I'm inclined to second it. I think that as we're looking at ensuring public protection in this process, option 2 looks much more sensible than option 1. But, as it relates to the concern, and a stakeholder used this phrase at a previous meeting as well about opening the floodgates. Floodgates have been open for a year and a half. And from a public protection standpoint, it does not seem as though the wheels have come off. The online supervision that folks have been doing during the pandemic, even when folks had to adapt to it very, very quickly, seems to have by and large gone well. And so, when we look at reasoning behind putting in restrictions requiring 50-50, for example, I have yet to hear, not just here, but anyplace else, anything substantive behind that desire. I hear concern, I hear people's fears, but I have not heard anything that is sort of tangible or seen any kind of research, and understandably it's early, that would suggest that it actually makes sense to be more restrictive rather than less. So I would encourage the committee to consider the approach outlined in option B here, option 2. Thank you.
And the next request for comment comes from someone identifying as Cody Q. Cody, I will send a request for you to unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Oops. Okay. I am actually currently a trainee getting supervision over telehealth, and my school supervisor and my site supervisor both they've moved during the pandemic. So that would really inhibit my graduation date and mine and a lot of others' graduation dates and ability to get hours on time in order to start building a sustainable income as a licensed therapist eventually. So I think that would put a lot of people behind financially and just career-wise. I agree with Jordan and Benjamin. And a lot of people in general have either moved out of state, different parts of the state, out of the country, and it would put a lot of people behind. And I also would want to be mindful of any ableism in both of these options. I personally would lean towards option 2, but as someone who's immunocompromised, I'm not sure when this non-pandemic life, post-pandemic, when that really will be with the variants, and I personally am uncomfortable with going in person and risking my health when telehealth seems to be working perfectly fine and is kind of the way of the future at this point.
All right, our next commenter identifies as Marianne Callahan. Marianne, I will send a request to unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Callahan.
Yes, we can
And,
hear you.
I'm sorry.
We can
you
hear
hear
you.
me?
Yep.
Okay. So I run a nonprofit community mental health setting, and so we are an exempt setting. We have about 75 trainees, a few associates, but primarily trainees. And my biggest concern is access to quality supervisors. So the way we're structured is that we have staff supervisors who conduct group supervision, and then we have a network of volunteer supervisors who provide an hour of individual supervision each week for our trainees. And with as many trainees as we have, I need 75 kind volunteers from the community to provide that volunteer supervision. And it's acutely difficult this year to get enough volunteer supervisors because everybody that's in our local network, their private practices are completely overflowing. And we've had many, many, many supervisors step back and say they don't have time to supervise for us this year. So we're reaching further and further afield to find volunteer supervisors. And that sometimes means leaving the Los Angeles area where we are. And, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think there are talented, wonderful supervisors all throughout the state and beyond the state that are still, licensed in California. And being able to connect our trainees with those supervisors by a video is absolutely fine as far as I'm concerned. And if we were to
15 seconds.
have this even one-time requirement meeting, that would be a barrier for the people who we want to supervise that are not local. So I hope that if it's option B, we remove that from exempt settings. Thank you.
And our next request for comment comes from, let's see, Rebecca Gonzalez. Rebecca, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this item. When this issue was discussed before, I was leaning towards option 2, and I still am. Part of the problem I had with option 1 is that the 50% requirement seemed arbitrary and not based on data. And option 2 leaves it up to the discretion of the professional, which is something that we always stress. We should be able to rely on them to make those decisions. And I also believe that having this remote supervision is necessary for people with underlying health conditions. I do have a concern that the first meeting has to be in person, especially for certain folks like underlying health conditions or people who may have some kind of disability that keeps them at home. So, but in general, I believe option 2 is much stronger than option 1. Thank you.
And our next request from comment is from Leah Brew. Leah, I will send a request to unmute your microphone, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, Leah Brew, LPCC and counselor educator. Just giving a counterpoint, I guess, to this argument discussion. I've got about 100 trainees that we've seen in the last year who've been remote, and we've had an increase in problems between our supervisors and our trainees, whereas there were fewer relationship problems prior to going remote. And that could be that everybody's under stress working from home, but it also could be that they never established the people who already had established relationships with their supervisors in person didn't have trouble. It's the people who never had an in-person relationship. And I also acknowledge the challenge with disability, especially people who are immunocompromised. And I wonder if there could be exceptions or something for that. I do like the option if we were to go 100% possibility. I would like them to meet at least once, and I like the option of the 60 days, within the first 60 days, to assess whether or not that supervisee is appropriate for telesupervision and telehealth for that matter. But I'm talking more about trainees. I'm less concerned about associates. It's more the people who are going out there. When we have trouble with students, it happens when they get to practicum, and that's a lot more difficult to navigate where the problem lies if the trainee and the supervisor have not been able to establish an appropriate relationship. Thank you.
And our next request to speak comes from Jennifer Alley. Jennifer, I will send a request to unmute your microphone, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. And I may have put in request to speak twice, so I just wanted to do it once. I wasn't sure if I did it for this one or not. So anyway, this is Jennifer Alley with CAMPT. And, CAMPT actually recognizes the need to take a good hard look at supervision and remote supervision. I don't have a recommendation for option 1 or option 2. I think some of, as we move forward, we may want, if there is a statutory change, we may want to have a clause or a sunset included in it. So there's an opportunity to evaluate the pre-licensed experience moving forward after this COVID experience to see if it worked. We'd like to see some clarification. Is in-person mean face-to-face or Zoom, right? Is it in-person, face-to-face, Zoom? What are we talking about? Or are we talking about remote telephone supervision only? So some additional clarification there might be needed as well. And then given the state that the waivers could be ending, is there any interest or desire to do urgency legislation, or is BBS going to limit themselves to just one bill, assuming that there's some sort of sunset clause, right? I mean, how that is crafted, I think would need to be discussed, but given that the waiver is expiring and there does seem to be some concern, urgency legislation would allow the statute to go into effect before January 1, 2023. I had to think about that year for a minute. So just some thoughts there for the discussion. We do appreciate Roseanne's comments about location on where the associate or trainee would be practicing. I think when we talk about remote use, we need to include sites, and is it in the setting or from their home should be part of that conversation as well.
And our next request for comment is from someone identifying as MBS. MBS, I will send a request to unmute your microphone, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, I'm sorry, there was a, my name is Mary Beth, and I'm a current trainee, MFT trainee, and I just wanted to echo the comments from Cody, Jordan, and Benjamin. I've really benefited from having supervision via telehealth, and I'd like that. I mean, it's important for that to continue. Something I haven't heard folks talk about is that there is more and more therapists are moving to telehealth practices only, which as I move it into associateship is something that I have to consider and possibly turn down working with somebody because they're only working via telehealth. And, I think that it really limits our ability to gain knowledge and experience that we could previously have benefited from. And for example, like working with like a specific group. I'm queer and I work with queer folks, and if I could work with supervisors that's queer, but they're only doing telehealth, that limits my ability to gain knowledge and cultural competence with a group that I would like to work with. So it's just something that I'd like to throw out there, that when considering this, and I think option 2 may be the best. Additionally, I've had a lot of supervisors move during the pandemic, and the relationship would be severed had we not been able to continue to get supervision remotely. Thank you.
And our next commenter is Angelina Gutierrez. Angelina, I will send you a request to unmute, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
I'm an APCC in Oakland at a community-based organization, and I'm glad that Cody beat me to it because I'm also an immunocompromised person, and right now it's not really required that anybody has a vaccine, to come to the office, and that hasn't really been implemented for work settings just yet by the governor. I did read today that he's going to start requiring that for schools, all school districts, pretty soon. But for me, like, I don't feel safe going to the office. My supervisor is over 65 as well. So she is also a high risk person. And we have to consider that many supervisors, just by placement and just generations, that many of my supervisors have been older. And so we have to consider not just the safety of our clients, but the safety of our clinicians is just as important. So I don't know if, so I think somebody did ask about an exception. I worry about having to give up my medical records and disclose things that I may not want to, in order to get an exception. I wouldn't want my clients to do something like that. So I wouldn't want to be expected to do that either. So meeting in person, I don't know if that should be really a requirement, because I've also experienced no difference in the quality of my supervision at all. And as a person who gets pain throughout their body and days where I cannot walk because of my condition, I've still been able to deliver services by sitting in my chair at home, when I'm in a lot of pain. So I would just wanted to reiterate all of that from Jordan, Benjamin, and Cody, and also from the last speaker, because I've also been able to
15
get
seconds.
opportunities to serve people in other counties, especially people who only speak Spanish, and that requires a supervisor from another county. So we've only been able to do telehealth. So I'd like to continue that. Thank you.
And the next request for comment comes from Christine Graham. Christine, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
I appreciate this opportunity to comment. My name is Christine Graham. I am the Vice President and Chief Clinical Services Officer for STARS Behavioral Health Group. We're headquartered in LA, but we serve clients through 9 California counties. And what we've seen, we are categorized actually as a non-exempt setting, and we've really struggled with our workforce issues. We are trying to provide high quality care for our county's populations, and we've got about 900 therapists working with us. These are associates, they're trainees, and we've got some licensed folks, but we're really struggling to find the qualified supervisors that we need to continue the care for the clients that we're providing care for throughout these counties. So I just want to, I want to echo what some folks have said already, that we are having to kind of look a little bit more far afield to find those qualified supervisors. And we're also having to do that with our clinicians as well, especially trying to find bilingual clinicians to serve our population, our clients. So these are real struggles that we're having, and I think limiting how much face-to-face supervision or video conferencing supervision that we can do is going to create access to care barriers for our clients, and I really am concerned about that. Thank you.
And our next request to comment is from someone identifying as Sandra Bozdashin. Sandra, I will send you a request to unmute, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Chime in here. I would just like to piggyback on a lot of what Jordan, Cody, and Christine has said. Our private practice is fully online. It was set up that way before the pandemic, and we serve clients throughout California, and we also have a lot of associates on our team. If we were to get rid of the video conferencing for supervision, we would have to let go of all of those associates. And we have not found any problems whatsoever in conducting our supervision this way. Actually, people really like it. And if we were to get rid of it, it would really hinder our practice and the services that we're able to provide to many of our clients. We have, people, our therapists are, Spanish speaking. We also serve a lot of the LGBTQ community, and it just really allows us to access more people who are interested in that. And by limiting the way we're able to provide supervision would just really be difficult for us to even continue running our practice. We've been talking a lot about pandemic life. I think this is just kind of something that we need to adapt to. The pandemic's not going away, and the pandemic has provided us with many different resources to provide services, supervision, and we need to really look at that and accept it into our way of life, because things are different now and they will remain different ever since this pandemic. And doing supervision this way is very helpful in numerous different ways, and getting rid of it will, it's just going to be very, very disheartening and frustrating, because running a private practice in California is already difficult enough. So it would really hinder
15
us.
seconds.
Thank you.
Okay, the next request for public comment from someone who has not spoken yet is from Darlene Davis. Darlene, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Okay.
Yes,
Oh,
Darlene?
okay, thank you. My name's Darlene Davis from Hope Counseling Center. You probably can't hear me.
We can.
Oh, okay. And I am all in favor of supervision via teleconference. So option number 2, I do like the idea of coming in at least once. But when we hear from all the stakeholders, that would be a very difficult situation to happen. We at Hope Counseling Center have not had any issues with doing our supervision via teleconference. I do have a question, though, that I need clarification for. So we've been told recently by camp that trainees and associates cannot conduct telehealth out of the office, that it has to be in the office. And yet we hear many comments, including Hope Counseling Center, for the reasons for not coming into the office for supervision, which would be the same reasons for not going into the office for doing telehealth. And we just put out a whole video and policies to bring everyone back, which is very difficult because some people do not live close to our offices. And now they're probably going to leave. So my question to the board when we get back to the board is, are trainees and associates allowed to do telehealth from their homes right now and in the future? And then supervision, I would also ask that we do it completely telehealth. That's it. Thank you very much.
And the next request to speak from someone who has not spoken yet is from, let's see, Miranda, someone identifying as Miranda Fury. Miranda, I will send a request for you to unmute your microphone and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. I want to thank the board and all the commenters for all the thoughtfulness that's going into this. I've been coming to this is my 3rd meeting, and I continue to be very impressed with the process and the exchange between thoughts between public and the board themselves. It's wonderful how open everything is. I wanted to piggyback on what the last person said. I work in an organization. Oh, and I'm an LCSW. I don't know if we're supposed to identify that, but then I have. Piggyback. We work in an office that works with children, and so if the associates are going back to the office, we're placing them in rooms with children who have not been inoculated or given the vaccine. And so there's definitely concern. And I'd be very interested in what Camp's perspective or any perspective is on associates coming back into the office, especially there can be disabilities with associates as well. I think I brought this up before. We were wanting to hire an associate who was very promising, but that person could not mobilize to the office. And so if associates have to come into the office, that means that there are people with disabilities who are not able to get hours. So it's effectively limiting who is it's effectively limiting mobility, people with mobility or other health issues from gaining hours and becoming therapists if they cannot mobilize to the office. Really quickly, because my time is going to run out. I also
Yes,
just want
15 seconds.
Okay, I wanted to quickly mention equity and parity, that we have been doing telehealth for a long time with exempt. And I really think, especially given all of the, um, accommodation issues related, that it would be.
And 2 minutes is up. As far as I can tell, everyone has had an opportunity to comment once. I'm now going to loop through and see if people do indeed have a request to comment a second time. I'm coming back to Jordan Bowler. Jordan, I will send a request to unmute your microphone if you do have a second comment. One moment. Oh, let's see. And I do not see Jordan Bowler in the meeting any longer. So let's move to Kathy Atkins. Kathy, I will send a request to unmute your microphone if you did have a second comment.
Hi, this is Kathy Atkins from CAMP. I had a couple comments. One, I wanted to reiterate what Jen spoke about earlier, and I wanted to make sure it didn't get lost. There's a lot of comments on this about if the board was able to come to a conclusion on telesupervision, that if they were, I don't know the logistics of how the board comes to their proposed legislation, but if you pulled apart telesupervision from the others and made it an urgency legislation, I think that would be appreciated by supervisors and supervisees. The second comment was I wanted to thank Roseanne for acknowledging the complexity and lack of clarity on some of these issues that are tangential to what we're discussing right now, like location of services. As you can tell, it is unclear, as commented by a few speakers just now, and we're looking forward to engaging on this conversation in the near future. And I don't know if this is, I don't think it's the place to discuss now, but maybe at Policy and Advocacy Committee, but I wanted to know if there was clarity on whether telesupervision included both I know I don't have the technical term, but the face-to-face, the Zoom, or does that include phone, or maybe you don't need to include phone in the definition? So I just wanted to know if there was any clarity around that when this is further discussed. And we don't have a strong, we haven't taken a position on option 1 or option 2, but as I'm hearing people talk about option 2, we don't have any direction, or excuse me, we don't have any objection to going that direction. So thank you very much.
And I will circle back to someone who now is online as Jordan B, might be Jordan Bowler. I will send you a request to unmute your microphone if you do have a second comment.
Jordan Bowler. Had to switch to my phone.
Okay.
So yes, I appreciate everyone's backup comments. I think it's kind of emerging clearly that the resounding perspective of everyone that's spoken is, "What are you, crazy? Why would you get rid of this?" And of course that this starts to cross over into an accessibility issue with people with disabilities and people in different places. Now you're starting to get over into legal problems, I think, with ongoing inhibition of telehealth supervision that I'm sure we would like to avoid, because I think it is very much discriminatory. So I think the good thing about the pandemic in terms of the learning what we could do is learning that this stuff can be effective without needing to do it in person. Just like that meeting that could really have been an email. I think that's I hope that's clear, and I appreciate and second the push to rush this as separate entirely to make sure that people don't lose their livelihoods for no reason whatsoever. Thank you.
And the next person who has requested a second comment is Jennifer Alley. Jennifer, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone. If you do have a second comment, you will have 2 minutes.
I don't have, this is Jennifer Alley. I don't need to make a second comment. I think Kathy kind of clarified, our interest in seeing if the board could separate telehealth and telesupervision into two different legislative vehicles and consider an urgency one for telesupervision. I think we're very, responsive and sensitive to the comments made by everybody here. And we really just want to move forward, in a manner that ensures, access for consumers and clinicians. And kind of remembering that telehealth rubric requires patient choice and the appropriate clinical appropriateness of that client for telehealth. And all of those factors kind of need to be buttoned in. I think that's why, we've been consistently since the start of this committee saying we want to have thoughtful conversations because it is a very complex issue and subject and really a complex world that we're living in. But we don't want to see some of the advantages and strengths from coming out of the pandemic to be lost. And that's why we're kind of looking at supervision a little bit differently than we have been other issues. So thank you. And again, we really do appreciate the hard work of the committee and the staff and the thoughtfulness and responsiveness to our comments and suggestions. So thanks again. Good job.
And the next commenter who's requested another comment is Leah Brew. Leah, I will send a request to unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes.
Hi, thanks. So listening to everyone talk and the difficulties with transitioning back to an in-person or even 50% in-person modality, I guess the only thing that I want to add is that I still think that a supervisor needs to assess whether or not the supervisee is appropriate to engage in both telehealth and telesupervision. And maybe that can be done virtually, that's fine, but there are some people who may not be appropriate for that modality. And I think that onus falls on the supervisor. And I really would like to codify that in the law. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next request for a repeat comment is from Benjamin Caldwell. Benjamin, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone. And if you have a second comment, you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ben Caldwell, MFT. I'll be brief, and I just wanted to, first of all, second what Jen was saying in terms of thanks to the committee members and to board staff. There's clearly a lot of interest and passion related to this issue, and I appreciate how thoughtfully you're looking at it. I wanted to respond specifically to Dr. Brew's comments from earlier because I think it's important that we make sure that we are addressing the full scope of what people's experiences around this are. And I would hold in mind here that under option 2 as it's proposed, or option B, any university, or for that matter, any individual supervisor still could require a certain portion of supervision to be in person, even all supervision to be in person if they so chose. This legislation, or this proposed legislation, would not disempower universities or supervisors in that way. And it is part of that proposal, as Dr. Brew had mentioned, that the supervisor do some meaningful assessment about whether that particular supervisee is indeed appropriate for telehealth or telesupervision. And that seems like a good, appropriate precaution that is appropriately put in the responsibility of supervisors to address. Thank you.
And our next request for a second comment is from Miranda Fury. Miranda, I will send you a request to unmute and you will have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry, I just kind of rushed my last point, and I wanted to say that I'm grateful that Jordan brought up the legal issue, because it's always it feels a little scary for me to do that. And Benjamin, I want to say that I always appreciate your points. They're just so well thought out, and actually everybody too, from Camp and SAW. But I just wanted to say it's legal. It appears I'm not a lawyer, but it appears to me to be a legal loophole in terms of discrimination, that exempt settings have been allowed to do this for a very long time, and non-exempt are not. And so I agree there should be thoughtful discussions, and we want to move cautiously. But I also think that it's a little urgent for those of us who need accommodation or might have trouble, participating in our career choice, that there be equity, in terms of, unless there's actual hard data that can support the idea that exempt settings are okay for telehealth supervision, but non-exempt or not, I think it really leaves the board open. And so I would urge I would urge parity in the law. I mean, I know people have opinions and ideas about what happens in private practice versus non-private versus exempt, but I think you would really want to have hard data that they're, to really substantiate a difference in law. I mean, that's just my thought, and I hope it doesn't sound intense for me to say that, but I wanted to make that point. So I do think it is actually urgent that there be some parity in that. And I also
15 seconds.
Okay, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you to all the people who are commenting. And of course, thank you very much to the board for considering it. Okay, thank you.
And as a check, I would like to check in with Sandra Bozdashin and make sure that you've had the chance to speak that you wanted. I sent you a request to unmute your microphone. If you could let us know if you do have another comment.
Hi, yeah, no, I think I got my point across. But
Wonderful.
I know it's a difficult situation, but I also think it's a great opportunity for us to really look at how we can change things to make everything more accessible for everybody around the board, therapists, associates, clients, everybody. So thank you.
And the next person I want to make sure we touched on was Kathy Atkins. Kathy, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. If you did have a second comment, you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
I'm sorry, I think that was on accident. My apologies.
That's fine. Thank you very much. And let's see, we have Rebecca Gonzalez. Rebecca, I will send you a request to unmute. If you do have an additional comment, you'll have 2 minutes.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW. I just wanted to second the suggestion that any legislation on this issue be introduced separately as urgency legislation, perhaps with a sunset clause. Thank you.
And I see no further requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Chris, I have a request. So, I see the, earlier on, I think, there is a representative from ASWB. I think her name is, I don't know if she's still there, but I'm actually really curious, about what the, in the, just in the national level, what has been doing. Because what we California is struggling is no difference, than all the other states. And so, and ASWB, definitely, takes a very active role, in helping, to, come up with some sample language, to, for the other states to follow. So I think her name is Kara Sander. And I, if she's here, I would really love to hear, what has been done or what's the suggested, what is on the table, for ASWB to pursue. And so I don't know if if Sarah or Kara is willing to speak up, but I would love to hear that, since you're there.
And this is the moderator. I will send participant Kara Sanner a request to unmute if she does wish to speak.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks. So I want to, I want to just, thanks everybody that, this is really wonderful. And I think this is exactly the reason, why we open it up, to hear from the stakeholders, from the public, about your, the experience and the opinion. And so, so I just want to clarify, that, the telehealth, we know, it works. And it's like we have no doubts that supervision, so far, I do it myself, so we know the benefits of it, and we know that there's just just wonderful advantage, and then also just it brings so much more equity, and close a lot of a parity that that a lot of us talk about. And so I think the if and I also want to continue to remind ourselves is like we want to have a thoughtful process, and yet there's still a lot of the layers of problems, because it involves like the trainees involved with the associates, and and Rosette bring up a really important question about the out of state practice, so there's just some to me, I know that, probably, that, the majority of the part do, teleconferencing, of supervision is inevitable. And yet, how do we also craft the legislation and making sure that, we don't have that in unintended consequences, and put, the associates and, and the supervisor, in kind of like, in a position that they might violate our law. And so so I and I also hear that I really like what everybody suggests, the association suggestion to put a sunset clause in it, to maybe to see how we can do it. And so so I mean I'm okay for what for just I'm okay too, to continue that conversation, and so, I don't know if, how, Chair Jones, and, how you want to proceed in that sense, because it looks like, or Steve might have some options. So, maybe, I'll hear from Steve, so apart from Kara, Steve, I want to hear from everybody.
I don't have any I don't have any suggestions that, well, I have options or I have ideas in my head. I just want to, I'd be amiss if I didn't say anything on this topic, so I have to talk. And I throughout this sitting here thinking, what we've had the video supervision has been done in exempt settings. It's been there. So, and honestly, I'm not sure what problems that has caused. Maybe some people are doing it 100%, maybe are not. I don't know. Um, our overall thing is public protection. But the other thing I'm really queuing in on is the access portion of it, because we are in as everyone knows, a mental health epidemic, and we need more therapists out there. So that's kind of one of my big concerns is if we put a little bit more restrictions on, then I don't know what that's going to do to somebody's access to care. That's one of my big concerns. The other thing too is I understand on the other argument though is how do we get quality supervision? We want to. That's our big concern, I think, with this whole thing about 100% video. How do we make sure that is quality supervision? That's really hard for us to regulate or to put in statutes. But I think, I could see is I think video supervision, my perspective, appears to be working. And I think maybe what the conversation then, if we want to put forward legislation to allow exempt settings to do video supervision, then we do have the conversation then switches over to some of the topics that Roseanne has kind of put forward. Let's talk about what we really want to see those settings to be like. Where can they do this? Or not necessarily where can they do video conferencing, but how do we strengthen, or how do we create regulations or not something that will give us the trust that we can have more trust in supervisors. I don't know how to I don't know if that makes sense, but I think the conversation of video supervision, I think, in my opinion, I think it's a good thing, should move forward, should be allowed in all kind of equity among the different settings. But then let's have that deep conversation about let's make sure that, how do we strengthen and make sure that the supervision is appropriate? And we already have, I mean, we've started with the supervision regs that are going in, so that's a start, and then we can have other conversations. That's kind of my 2 cents, but I think for me, really where my concern is access to care. And I think if, unfortunately, there's not enough time to really put anything in place to keep the waivers going. Yeah, I think it would reduce access to care, and that's a concern of mine. But I do fully understand the, the implications of proper supervision and wanting to make sure that we have, competent therapists out there that know what they're doing. So that's my 2 cents.
And this is the moderator. We do have Kara Sanner unmuted.
Hi, folks. It's been an interesting afternoon for me over here in the Northeast, listening to your conversation. I guess we're a little, not quite the Northeast, but certainly much further east than you fine folks in California. Just to address Christina's question, the ASWB has the model law. We have the Model Social Work Practice Act that we use as a resource for navigating best practices in social work regulation. And we did update the model law to incorporate provisions related to electronic social work services, and the model law is just not very prescriptive as it relates to electronic social work services. It acknowledges that electronic practice or teletherapy is social work. And so sort of the same requirements would apply across the board. But to kind of supplement that and support that, we've developed in partnership with NASW and the Council on Social Work Education and the Clinical Social Work Association, we've published the technology standards in social work practice, as well as a separate document, which is model standards for technology and social work practice. So 2 different guidance documents, one targeting the practitioner and the other one supporting regulators. And there, obviously there are a lot of considerations for performing teletherapy. However, there really isn't any research or data to suggest that a specific amount of supervision hours, for instance, that the outcomes might be different if the individual was with the supervisor in person 50% of the time. That kind of detailed, those kind of detailed requirements just don't, there isn't anything to kind of supporting whether or not being more prescriptive with regard to telesupervision or experience earned through teletherapy. There just really isn't anything that helps support, those provisions in terms of, how you might increase oversight or limit certain activities. So unfortunately, I don't have much to offer the committee in terms of really the specifics of the provisions and the items that you've discussed today. And in part, that's why I was really interested to participate. I had shared with Steve just a compilation of, I think, about 10 states who have enacted more permanent measures for telesupervision and practice earned through supervised practice earned through teletherapy. So, I can really kind of speak to what some of the other states are doing, and it's by and large, they're permitting it without additional restrictions. So, I'm happy to pass on some of the resources that I had shared to you, because I think there is certainly, in terms of standards for practice, there are a lot of considerations for the practitioner. But I'm not sure that specific requirements, for the board in terms of reducing the number of hours that can be earned through telesupervision, for instance. I'm not sure, there just really isn't any information that really speaks to that. So it's been instructive for me to listen, and I'll certainly carry it back to my colleagues here at ASWB. And we have a regulations and standards committee that is tasked with kind of overseeing any of the requirements that come out through the model law. So just, I think there are going to be some ongoing discussions here internally, but we generally don't try to get too prescriptive in terms of the specific requirements that were discussed today. So I'm sorry, I can't be of more guidance there.
No, that's very good. Thank you so much, Kara. I mean, I think, especially, now affirming the fact that, for one, there's very limited research, to really talk about the efficacy, of supervision via teleconferencing. I think that is a very affirming thing, that why we feel that sort of like, that uncertainty, because we just really don't have a whole lot of, support out there. And I'm so glad that ASWB is actively, working with, the CSW and NASW nationally, to really come up with the standard. And so I think we definitely are all in this boat together. So, but thank you so much for being in the meeting and willing to accept my invitation for you to speak. So thank you so much, Kara.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Susan, go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank all the people who spoke today, because I think it was very, very instructive. And while I think we have a duty to be protective of the public, very often the professionals who are also, I hope, thinking of protecting the public are thinking in the same vein. So I totally understand what everybody was saying. And I think we've been able to avoid one of the very big problems, which is, what do you do with unvaccinated people, except for the person who services only children? And hopefully that's going to be resolved within the next month. So I think that this obviously requires at least more time for us to decide exactly what we want to say. And what I'm curious about, and maybe Steve can answer this, is there a requirement for supervisors now has there ever been a requirement for supervisors, say quarterly, to report to the board any problems, any changes, anything at all that they felt should be reported to the board? Because I'm thinking if we change this, if there is no requirement now, that we could change this to say that supervision by teleconference is acceptable in all modes, but that quarterly supervisors need to report to the board problems encountered or something like that.
There's nothing that I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, Steve. Is there anything
Okay.
now?
Yeah, we don't require anything like that. We have never done that. I mean, I can see the value in that, but we're kind of relying on the supervisors to really, work with their supervisees and kind of address issues, on a one-on-one basis. If there's problems, then they should address those. We can't really, there's nothing that we could do. I mean, if they brought up, if it was something that was illegal and against our statutes and regs, then there's something we could do. But if the supervisor sees that there's maybe that the supervisee is not performing as well as they think they should, there's nothing we could really do. And then also for the pure fact of we have, I think, a population of like 40,000 associates, it would be a pretty big, I would need a, to do something like that, I would need a huge staff. But one of those things though, we are kind of, it's kind of tightening it up a little bit is the supervision regs that are going through where they actually have to kind of evaluate, it's in the regulations where they should be evaluating the supervisee on a yearly basis, so that we kind of are making that a bit more of a point that you really should be sitting down and evaluating, not, you know, not just having the meetings during the week on clients, but then evaluating the actual supervisee to see how they're doing. So that does strengthen a little bit on that. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I can think of is that it would not be in the legislation at all, but that perhaps the staff occasionally could contact, you know, 3 or 5 supervisors and ask them if they observed any problems at all with telehealth that we should be knowledgeable about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I see where you're coming from. I'm trying to think of how to, I'd have to work out something. I don't know how that would look. I think we have the right to audit supervisors and stuff, but I'm not even sure that would really, we could, I mean, yeah, I think it would be another survey. I think, and honestly, I think if we move forward with legislation or what we're going to do here, if we open that up for video supervision, I can say that since we know it's coming, or if we have legislation coming down, and we know if it's such a big importance to figure out if video conferencing is working, I know we would definitely come up with some way to gauge, you know, the how that really works out. I mean, like in the next few years, to kind of get a gauge on is there really an issue? Are we seeing bigger issues? You know, we could actually put something in place to do that. It would be whether it's survey or keeping stats on the consumer complaints we receive more intently to see if they come from video, you know, telehealth or people that had been, you know, I don't know, because there's ways we can kind of start to look at that.
In any of the complaints that we've received, do any of them have to do with telehealth?
You know, honestly, there's, I don't think we've received many. I think in some of the things that I know I've heard from other states that happen are consumers complaining about licensees or whoever, so whether they're registrants or licensees, somebody performing telehealth and like they'll be in an incorrect setting, like they'll be in Starbucks and will be providing telehealth. So people not, I think it's more or less not following the legal guidelines that they should be following for confidentiality and such. Beyond that, I mean, we wouldn't really get much of a complaint, I don't believe. So that's, I don't think I can't, nothing has come across my desk yet. So that means either the cases have been, you know, non-substantial or they haven't been within our set of, you know, laws and regulations. So, but I think that's really the concern would be, is like the confidentiality, you know, people kind of, it's just really, I mean, also like abandoning clients during sessions and just, I mean, so it's really kind of legal stuff, that legal and ethical guidelines that we would be concerned about, that we would probably get complaints on.
And one would hope a supervisor would immediately notice that. And
yeah, they should, I mean, that's what they should be able to determine what's going on with their client, with the supervisee's clients. So yeah, so we can have further, this will be a further conversations. I've got lots to talk about on that, so.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I think that we have more questions than we have answers at this point. And I do appreciate all of the comments from our stakeholders. It is a lot to think about. You know, it's difficult to balance the you know, the drive for consumer protection, but also, you know, finding a way to increase accessibility and make sure that we have a mental health support for consumers. How do we measure that effectiveness? I understand that, you know, that video supervision has been around for a while within the exempt settings. You know, so for those in the meeting, this weighs heavy on us, and I hope you understand that we definitely are not taking this lightly. How do we measure? How do we measure the effectiveness of video supervision when as clinicians, you know, for years I think that we have relied upon the relationship that we've developed with our supervisees as a guide and as a way of assessing their ability to be effective practitioners. And you know, so how do we continue to move forward in this evolving climate, right? Where we understand that telehealth and video supervision are not going away. Um, and I really do appreciate the comments from Kempt about about how to look at writing the legislation differently. So maybe that we do have some safeguards in place in case things are, you know, don't pan out the way that we want. And you know, because none of us up here want to use, I think it was Jordan's comment, to be on the wrong side of history. And also, you know, to make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences. Um, so, you know, I'm go ahead, Christine, because I think I'm just rambling at this point, and you know, this issue is a very heavy issue.
It really, really is. And I think, I think this has so much more to unpack, than, the more that we talked about. I think, this is actually really wonderful. It's the beginning of the conversation, instead of like coming to the end, because obviously, just coming from, the associates, comments, from the practitioners' comments, supervisors' comment, we all know that this is not going away, and yet from the consumer protection, from the equity position, from the access issue, we have a lot more. And I want to bring one more to the plate. It's really about like, how do we ensure, the supervisor, are practicing within California, because we also don't want, a bunch of the out of state, practitioner or the supervisor, that's, coming to California to practice. They may be living, in Massachusetts, and yet they may have a California license, and yet, I mean, I think we have more, of this issue, then we need to really put it, kind of like, put the provision in place so that we can also make sure that, it's not just about the quality, but, it's so great right now that, that supervisor are not heavily, regulated, and yet we also need to make sure that, we're not encouraging, any out of state practice and violating, some of the rules that we've already in place, in our supervision law. So being said, Chris, I am in, in line with you that, we have more to unpack. So I am actually thinking, that, if we don't do anything, and just continue the conversation, will that be something that, everybody, feel comfortable? Because I actually spent some time looking at even like option B, that's what everybody, wants. And I'm okay with this. Don't get me wrong. It's like Christina Wong doesn't have to have her way, and I think, just even looking at this, it might it might take some time, for us to really hash out, whether, there's any, loopholes and things like that. So I'm wondering in that sense, how should we move forward? Because I think that's eventually, I think we have to make a decision about what we want to do. Chris, back to you. I am not really helping you this time.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
I
First
think
day on the job, and you know, got a little bit going on. So I guess the question would be this then: if you know, if are we able to pick a direction versus selecting an option? If we say, hey, we're hearing from our stakeholders, we're looking at, you know, an overwhelming uh, movement towards option two, but also understanding that option two as it sits is not comprehensive, and there needs to be changes that are made in order to get it to a point where we can look at, you know, legislation. Is that something that as a committee that we can decide on? Is, hey, we want to move in this direction, but this isn't this is the very first draft, and we need to figure out how to make it better. You know, with input from you know, from our stakeholders. Is that something that we can do as a committee? I'm asking.
Susan has a comment.
Sure.
I would like to know from Roseanne right now. That's exactly what I was going to say before. From everything we've heard, I am in favor of option two right now, but I realize it needs to be expanded. Roseanne, are we under a time constraint in doing this, or what should we be doing next?
Can I speak?
Well,
Go ahead.
Steve, are you going to talk or do you want me to?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, there's no time constraint. I think the only thing that we are looking at though is with the waivers going away, that exempt setting, I mean, the private practice and non-exempt settings will not be able to do this anymore. So that's kind of the only time constraint that we're looking at. Beyond that, I mean, it's really up to the committee to move forward on whether they want to do, you know, move forward with one of these options, or if they want to, you know, continue the conversation. That is fully, you know, your option. One of the proposals, you know, that people keep mentioning is, you can, and bear with me, Roseanne, is the emergency legislation, where you could probably put something in place that, you know, would last in sunset later on, so that it would actually, we could take that time for discussion over the next year or so to figure out what we really want to make the final law. But the problem, the only issue with that is then if we, you know, if we go with one of the options, or if you know, put something out there, we continue the waiver, then later on the line, it might be harder to pull back if for some reason we find out that it's not where we wanted to go. There's a lot of, and Roseanne, what kind of, sorry.
So when we're talking about emergency legislation, yes, we can always attempt to run emergency legislation. That's always an option on the table. We would have to find a legislature that's subject to a higher threshold of approval with the legislature. So, you know, assuming we could find a legislator that's willing to run emergency legislation, that would always be an option that we would be willing to pursue. That being said, it's not entirely under our control if somebody's willing to do that or not. Depends on, you know, if the issue rises to a certain threshold that they feel that that's something they want to do. In terms of how to move forward right now, I mean, at this point, it's highly sounding like the waivers are going to end coming over October 31st. There is going to be a gap in time. So there is a little bit of urgency, you know, to run legislation. However, you never want to take legislation lightly. You always want it to be well thought through. And there are a number of layers to this. I think that one possible direction would be to move forward with considering option two, but do some fine tuning in light of kind of looking at some of these other issues. Where are the associates and the supervisees located, both in state and out of state? What is the board's intent on what should be allowed? And then kind of in consideration of that, fine tuning the language from there. I don't have the answers on how to do that at this point, because there's kind of a lot of considerations that need to be taken into account and you know, worked through. But you know, we can always just keep going with it, and you know, if we're ready to run legislation, we can try to run legislation. Beginning of the legislative process is always the best, and that's starting in January. But typically at this point, you know, we would have something a little bit more clearly ironed out. if we were going to move forward with that in terms of, typically if we were running a bill like with our CE bill for associates, so we already have board approval for that, we're pretty much ready to go. Doesn't say we couldn't try to introduce something in March or April. But it gets a little bit harder to get a vehicle at that point. Doesn't mean that it's impossible, and that we could try, but we do want to make sure that we get it right, is what I would say, and not have to, it's definitely better to do it without unintended consequences the first time, for sure.
Susan?
Can we do something now about the way, not dealing with the legislation? Can we do anything right now dealing with the end of the waiver and the end of the non-exempt sending situation?
Not that I see, because the waiver is at the discretion of the governor's office and the DCA director, not the board. And so the governor granted the director the ability to issue waivers when the state of emergency happened. When the state of emergency ends, I believe that authority completely goes away, and it sounds like they're winding pretty much most of the waivers down anyway. So I don't see any way that can be fixed at this point.
Roseanne, can I ask a question also, with regards to, and I don't know that I'm a big fan of the emergency legislation, although I know that that's something that we need to really consider. What is the timeline of that? Like if let's say that all the ducks lined up in a row and it was ready to go, how long does that process take?
It takes about this. I mean, when we've run a couple of emergency bills in the past to correct some issues. I think both of those, it was around a July effective date. It still has to go through, both committees of the legislature, and to the governor's desk. It's still, committees don't start until April. It takes time to move through the assembly and the Senate. So I would say it would be unlikely to see anything get through before July at the earliest, even if it was emergency.
July of 2022?
July of 2022, yes.
Okay, and so what we're talking about possibly then is looking at January of 2023, if we're going to take some time and put this thing together. Okay, so we're talking about 5 months difference.
Well, if we're going to take some time to put it together, I mean, there's a certain point, really, bill shopping happens in January. So bills for the year, typically we would shop that in January and February and get a vehicle. If we were to try to get a vehicle later, like in March or April, it'd be much harder. So we might have to catch the next legislative cycle. It just depends on the timing and how long it takes. There's never any guarantees that you would, obviously if it was something that all of our associates supported, we might have a little bit of a better chance getting a vehicle in like April from a dead bill, but I would say we've never really done it that way. It's more unlikely.
Okay, so then realistically, if we're going to take the time and do it right, we're talking about something that wouldn't go into effect until, again, all the ducks lining up, that wouldn't go into effect until possibly like July of 2023 or January of 2024.
That's a possibility, yes.
Susan?
I think we should make sure that we have finished and we are ready to have a bill that's ready to be by January, because otherwise we're putting ourselves too far behind in anybody realizing that we know what we're doing. And we've heard a lot of things today. We have a lot of thoughts going on. I mean, I don't know, what is the next step? Roseanne, are you going to take everything you've heard today and rewrite it, or what's going to happen?
Well, I mean, we have kind of the two options on the table. So I haven't really heard of any specific changes to those topic. I don't have anything to change until we discuss what needs to be changed on either one of those.
So we need to take a vote here, or we need to present it to the full commission?
Well, you need to determine, if you like one of the options, and if you want changes to one of the options, you could move one to the Policy and Advocacy Committee for further discussion.
All right. Well, I guess Christina.
I'm just, I have a suggestion,
Okay.
so if it looks like that, and I'm not sure if this is, Roseanne will be ready. So, we can continue on this conversation right here, in the telehealth committee, and just really look at, some of the questions, that, so we, that Roseanne posed. And really, at least, at this time, to give Roseanne some sort of like a framework, how to refine, the languages. Because the bottom line is that, it's all about taking, the feedback, to rewrite, the legislation, and the language. And so that, we can present it to, to the next level, to kind of like go through this little, filtering process. So, so right now, I think, we know the direction, but we don't know what really is the content. So, so the option is that, we can actually just, if we want to make it fast, then we have to probably, buckle down, continue this conversation, give Roseanne some, some clear direction, and then we can move forward. Now, if not, we feel that, we're so done for the discussion today, then it, likely will means that, that we will be, probably, taking a little bit more time, have some more thoughtful discussion and really find out all the loops and holes and, and so what it means is that, if we take a little bit more time to discuss, Roseanne will have a little bit more, direction, where to dig and find out more, more stuff and, post some more questions for us to discuss. If we stop right here, then it means that, that we definitely won't be able to pursue anything until, until the following legislative cycle. Did I summarize it good, Roseanne?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
So our option really right now is that should we continue this conversation about the option 2 or not?
I think that's what I'm hearing. I think is the best way to go. At least that's what I would recommend from everything that we've heard from everybody today. So does that need to be a motion?
No,
Or
I think we would just continue on with the bullet points we presented about option 2. And then we could continue the discussion from there.
So,
Steve?
now, yeah, why don't
Steve and then-
Susan go?
I would
Yeah,
say if we're going to do that, how about a break?
exactly. How about a little lunch break, a quick
Just a
break?
thought.
Okay. Oh, so we're doing that like literally right now. That's not like in a future meeting.
Yeah, I think that what we would need to do is we would need to take a closer look at option 2, kind of have some discussions around the bullet points that I brought up in the memo about option 2, and kind of see how the committee feels, if this committee feels that any changes are necessary, or if it's good as it is.
Okay. All right. Susan, did you have something to add before we go to break? Susan,
What did you say? I'm sorry.
did you have something to add before we go to break? You had your hand up.
No.
Okay. All right. So what do we want to do? How long of a break?
Half hour.
1:30.
1:30? 20 minutes?
20 minutes?
Does that work? Okay. All right. We are on break until 1:30. See you guys in 20 minutes. We all here? Susan, are you back? All right, so where we left off, I believe that we were going to do a bit of a deep dive into option 2 and then discuss the considerations and then look at different ways to possibly move forward. So, Roseanne, you have the floor.
All right. So in looking at option 2, there are several questions that I raised in the packet of in the memo about that. So let me just summarize again what option 2 does. It clarifies that face-to-face direct supervisor contact means either in person or via two-way real-time video conferencing. It requires in all settings, exempt and non-exempt, that a supervisor must conduct an initial in-person meeting with a supervisee before initiating direct supervision. And then it requires that during the initial in-person meeting, the supervisor assess the appropriateness of allowing the supervisee to gain experience hours via telehealth and the appropriateness of the supervisee to receive supervision via video conferencing, and then to document that. One of the first things for discussion is whether the initial in-person meeting requirement should apply to all settings as currently written or to non-exempt settings only. Currently, exempt settings can do supervision via video conferencing without an initial in-person meeting. It's been that way for a long time. However, I drafted it, the way that I drafted it is, it applies to everyone because it seems like there's a public protection reason beyond that for that, so that equity would be desirable in this case. But I did want to point that out so that it can be discussed.
Okay, you want to start there? All right, comments from the board?
Did you say, Roseanne, that it would be, because I'm looking for it on the piece of paper, right? Did you say that it would be in non-exempt settings?
Yes, it would apply, that requirement, the initial in-person meeting requirement would apply to all settings across the board, exempt and non-exempt.
Do we define in-person?
Yeah, either in person, so two people in person in the same room, or via a two-way real-time video conferencing. Well, that's for direct, I mean, the meeting, are we talking about the initial meeting? The initial meeting has to be in person.
When you say the initial meeting and you say in person, are you talking about in the same room? No.
Well, I guess we need to discuss if that the intent is in the same room. And to me, that's what in person means. If there's question about that, then maybe we need to discuss.
Well, personally, I would object to that based on what we heard today about all the supervisors. And I've heard this generally too out there. People have been moving around. And if supervisors are moving someplace else, it's impossible for them to both be in the same room. I mean, not impossible, but if you're talking about traveling from north to south, it's sort of impossible for them to be in the same room. And if it's so hard to get good supervisors, I don't know how we can require that.
So I have
in favor of not requiring in the same room. And obviously we can go back and revisit that if situations change in the next 2 or 3 years, I would think.
So I'll raise my hand.
Yes, please.
Okay. So, so I think, I understand, there's definitely, problems and stuff like that. And so I want to also put in context that, for the non-exempt setting, way back when, pre-COVID, it's required for them to meet face to face. And I understand, it's like old practice now. But I think if it's only one time, and the requirement, for the supervisor to assess the appropriateness, for even teleconference, for telehealth appropriateness for, what is the other, the appropriateness of, gaining, even out, hours, telehealth, and then also the supervision, the two things. I think, having one time, in the course of 3.5 years, of the supervision, I think it's warrant, and this is, and I also want to refer back for Leah, point about, this, um, that's established the relationship. And so, I think it's important that, when you have the first, face to face, in person, face to face, you have like, you can have a very lengthy, discussion. And really, the job is not just about, it is a beginning, that they serve a very important function, for the assessment. And so in that sense, we can also, share, our law written that we can actually share that, this is also how we protect the, consumer by having, one time, face-to-face assessment in order to, to assess the appropriateness. So I think the purpose is important, and I know practically it is really challenging, for all the reasons that, that's this supervisee talked about, about the accessibility, about like the immune problem and stuff like that. So I don't know if there's any other exception, but I think for the general public, we really should, put that in place. So sorry, Susan, I have a different view.
Well, wait, let me just say one thing. Can we put in there something that says, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, but the unanimous opinion of what we heard today was the opposite of that. Can we put something in that says, if geographic location prohibits this, or immune deficiency? I mean, can we put some exclusions in there that say, if it becomes impossible, then face-to-face must be by face-to-face via technology? I mean, I understand what you're saying, but if the person is, 800 miles away, I think it's almost unprofessional to demand that they see each other face-to-face.
And I'd like to jump in a little bit. I want to be real careful, that it wasn't unanimous. There was opinions on the other side about having a face-to-face interaction with the supervisee. I am of the opinion that there is a diagnostic or assessment, period that needs to take place to make sure that the supervisee is capable of providing, online or telehealth services or in-person services to their clients. And that's making that assessment without meeting the person is very difficult to do, because there's a whole lot that can get missed on when you're making that initial evaluation. So I tend to agree with Christina. And I also like the option of maybe not making it the very first, meeting. Maybe that does, I kind of like the, within the first 60 days of engaging in a supervisee relationship, that in-person, meeting is there, so that there can be that relationship building, and also that assessment to determine the the competency of the supervisee. Roseanne?
Yeah, I'll just weigh in on that. It was a different bullet point, but
Sure.
one really great suggestion that Christy had in looking at this is that she did note that right about the time we were writing this memo, we found out that our supervision regulations were approved to go into effect. And one thing that is in the new supervision regulations is that within the first 60 days of commencing supervision, supervisors and supervisees will need to sign a supervision agreement within that 60 days, which basically outlines each party's responsibilities. So they'll need to, have that talk. And then also the supervisor within 60 days, a new supervisor within 60 days of commencing supervision will need to do a self-assessment report, just to kind of a checklist of all the requirements that you need to be a supervisor, just to make, it's a double check for them to make sure that they actually meet all the requirements, so they can think of it by bullet points. Yes, I meet this. Yes, I meet this. We're good to go. So that it's possible that the initial in-person meeting might be a good fit with this timeline, so that that could all be discussed together. Also, if they are, doing video conferencing for a couple times ahead of that, before the 60 days, it gives the supervisor kind of a chance to, assess how things are going and get feedback if they have concerns, rather than it's the first time they meet them. So that is an alternative way that the language can be crafted, is that instead of saying at the first meeting, it could say, let's see, within 60 days of commencing supervision, the supervisor must conduct the in-person.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Susan, go ahead.
I think that's very reasonable. And I changed my mind, because when I think about it, if the supervisor is moved away and is 800 miles away, that's after the relationship has started, because you don't start your relationship with the supervisor that's 800 miles away. You start with somebody who's close by, and then maybe they do move away. So, okay, so I changed my mind. I think what Roseanne said right now makes total sense. I like the idea of 60 days. And I think that somewhere in there, we need to say that the supervisee in doing telehealth must show the location that they are going to use to provide therapy, because if they're showing a non-exempt setting that is inappropriate, the supervisor needs to talk about that.
I'm not quite sure what I mean. What, can you clarify that last point? So Susan, it could be a not.
Remember, we were talking about confidentiality.
Mm-hmm.
And if the person being supervised is doing his or her work from a place that the supervisor thinks is inappropriate for providing therapy, then they get to see that. So somehow or other, the person who's being the supervisee needs to show the supervisor exactly where they're going to provide therapy from, the location.
Yeah, I think, Susan, that really hits the nail on the head of another issue that we need to consider with this. We've had some requests. We have a section in our law that was added before COVID that basically says that a supervisee can see clients where the employer permits it. And of course, before COVID, things looked very different, and so there's some ambiguity in what that law meant. So I think that we do need to look at that as well. So I think you might be onto something there.
Actually, I think Susan brought up a really, really good point. The location, of the supervisee and the supervisor, really has to be specified, because, well, or, put it this way, I don't know if that, how that is going to happen. I'm just really, addressing the law that I think, to the least, that, that the supervisor and the supervisee has to be in California. So, and whether they will specify the location, to, provide in their supervision, self-assessment, a location where they're seeing the person or what, I don't know. But I think, Susan is onto the important topic that I was just about to bring up, which is like the location of everybody, where the supervisor and the supervisors are.
Let's hold that thought and circle back to that at the end of the discussion. Don't let me forget though, because I do want to revisit that in light of this. But I do want to find out if I do want to get an answer to the first bullet point, which is, should this apply, the initial in-person meeting requirement apply to all settings or to only non-exempts?
I think we're moving towards all settings. I think that at least that's my opinion. That's what I'm hearing from the stakeholders. That's what I understand that we lose oversight when you start moving into the smaller practices. But when we're looking at accessibility and making sure that we're providing the opportunity for for mental health services, I think if we start limiting again, where this can happen, then we're going to limit the options for for other people.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that for bullet point 1, we would like it to remain all settings, and also for the last bullet point that we kind of jumped to, we would like this to be within 60 days, not an initial, within 60 days of commencement of supervision. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Cool. Should I move on to the next bullet? And I am going to circle back to Susan and Christina's location point at the end, just so you know. Because I think we do need to just, whether it can be resolved today, I think it does need to be discussed.
Are you two ready to move forward, or do you have any other comments, Christina or Susan? No, we're good. Okay.
Okay. The next bullet question is whether the initial in-person meeting requirement should apply only to new supervision relationships after its effective date, or all supervisory relationships.
My personal opinion, Chris, you haven't invited me to talk, but I'm talking anyway. So I caught myself doing this. Okay, sorry. So I think for those existing, okay, maybe put it this way. So Roseanne, then the question would be, when the new supervision law kicks in, will that applies to the existing supervisors also? Will they also be required to do their self-assessment?
The way that it's written, it's a little ambiguous. And so I think we're going to, if we don't clarify it in the language, when we go to implement, it's going to be, we're going to get a lot of questions. And that's what I want to avoid, is having ambiguousness. So it says, on or after January 1, 2023, before initiating direct supervision with a supervisor, must conduct an initial in-person meeting. The way that I read it, it would be, I'm thinking of it as for new relationships. I'm assuming for old relationships, I mean, at some point we just have to make a decision to move forward, and we would assume that those people already know each other and have got all that worked out. But I think we want to kind of start with a fresh slate moving forward. I think it would be confusing to go back and say, okay, now all of you people that are already in relationships, you need to go back and reshuffle this.
Yeah. So Roseanne, I think that is exactly, what I thought, because, especially we have that big bill, ready to be implemented, for the supervision bill. And so, so I think that is important, that we be consistent, so in that sense, if we don't want to be so ambiguous, then only apply, for those new relationships which also may mean that, that is, the new supervisor or the supervisee, enter into their agreement, after the, whatever dates to make it even more specific, only apply to those, new supervisee relationships. And I think that would probably be clear, right?
Yeah, what I'm thinking is the way that it's written, we could say on or after January 1, 2023, before initiating direct supervision, a supervisor must conduct an initial in-person meeting within 60 days with each new supervisee. So that means that, if the relationship is new on or after January 1, 2023, you have 60 days to have that meeting. Is it going to leave some people out that, the relationship might have started 2 days before? Yes, but that's just happens with law implementation. I don't think we want to add a lot of confusion. I think we just want to move forward at that point.
That's always about, like, there's always a cutoff. There's always going to have, like, some people that didn't get on the train and, that kind of stuff. So no, I think that makes it clear. So yeah, that's okay. Chris, I don't know what you think, but
No, I agree. I'm shaking my head. I agree. Yes. Or nodding my head, not shaking it, nodding.
Okay.
This just comes from years of trying to implement things and all of the nuances, that we've experienced, we've had in the past with trying to, all these questions that come up with people that kind of get caught in the middle. I think that's the cleanest.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So only new on that. Okay. The next question I had is whether fitness for video conferencing supervision should be the only assessment, or whether fitness for telehealth clients should be assessed as well. It's written for both. So just want to make sure that I'm assuming you're on board with assessing both, but just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
My next question, should the language about assessing the appropriateness of allowing the supervisee to receive video conference supervision or practice via telehealth be more specific in some way, or is it appropriate to leave the language as is to give more discretion to the supervisor? I wrote it deliberately vague. I think the point of this is really to have the supervisee think, it's really my responsibility to make sure that that this is a good thing to do. So, then they have to document it. So my thought is it's just to get them thinking. I don't think we need to have a big checklist of things they need to go through, but the board members may disagree. So wanted to bring up that point.
Should I avoid
be at
speaking
their
first?
discretion.
Go ahead, you, Susan.
No, I was just saying, I think it should be more vague because the supervisor should have discretion.
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. And also, these associates already went through, the either the traineeship or the, internship. So, so I think it would be good, to just leave it open. They have experience already, what supervision is like. And, sometimes also what telehealth is like. So I think if we leave it to the discretion, of the supervisor, and supposedly they should be document, if it's not appropriate, the reason, or it's appropriate, what the reason. So I think, that is enough mechanism, put the burden on the supervisor so that they can, so that they can also, have some, documentation and some mechanism, then we can say that, this is the way how we protect the consumers.
Yes, I agree also.
Okay, well then that actually is looking pretty clean. I want to discuss locations, but the changes that I'm seeing right now is just each new supervisee we would add in, and then within the 60 days instead of right away. So that's what I'm hearing. Before we open it up for public comment, I do want to go back and circle back on Susan's discussion on location, because that kind of is the elephant in the room regarding this. There are a lot of considerations on location. For instance, I alluded to earlier, and this is probably something that needs to be addressed separately, but we do have a clause in law that requires supervisees are only permitted to practice at the place where the employer permits business to be conducted. That was really intended as an incidental allowance before COVID. You know, if somebody needed to go out because a patient was homebound or something like that. Obviously, during COVID, we know that a lot of people are practicing from home. When you read that particular requirement, it doesn't read to prohibit it, but there is some serious questions that need to be considered about, is that what the board intended? Also, you have the question of, we get all the time, given this obviously opens the door for a lot of out-of-state employers to hire associates and trainees. And so we get certain types of questions regarding that, not only where are they working in state, but my associate is temporarily traveling out of state. My associate is registered here, but they've permanently moved to another state. Can they practice? The supervisor has to be California licensed, but you know, can the supervisor be living out of state, out of country? We get all these types of questions, and the law really doesn't address that, and it really hasn't needed to as much in the past as it seems to now with COVID. A lot of people have relocated. So I want to see what people's thoughts are of, does this need to be addressed in the current language, or does it need to, you know, do we need to address this separately? So I guess I'll leave it at that. I mean, we could talk all day on this subject, I think, but let's just open it up.
Yeah, you know, I think the elephant definitely is in the room, you know, because I think even for the public comments, you know, that, you know, we heard that, business are actually being conducted at home. And so if the law is already, you know, the existing law, you know, said that, you know, especially for the non-exempt setting, right, that they have to be conducted, I mean, the supervisor should, you know, it's only permitted to allow business to be conducted, you know, where the business is. So I think, you know, that is, you know, if that's the intent, you know, I don't think that we should change it.
It says where the employer permits business to be conducted. So,
see,
and I know that Camp has some opinions on this, so I'll let them speak to it too. But I think that when we actually crafted that particular language, we weren't thinking about a post-COVID world. I'll say that. So I think the implications of what we thought that law meant now and how it read then and how it reads now are very different things that are worth a discussion.
I think this is such a big discussion, you know, really, you know, because I think that's, because, you know, the permitted, you know, means that the supervisor, you know, has the right, to really allow, the supervisee to stay home and work. So in that sense, you know, when there's any violation of confidentiality, you know, any violation of the ethical and lawful practice, then what does it really mean? You know, is it on the supervisor or on the supervisee, right? And so, you know, and then what kind of consumer protection that we have right there.
Right.
You know,
and we also get a similar type of question, or we've gotten it a lot with the pandemic, especially with schools and their trainees. Well, this trainees moved out of state or the trainees moved out of country. You know, how does that work? So, you know, the law as written, you know, may need to be re-examined, but it doesn't really, I don't think there was ever any law written with intent to address those because it really never came up before. So.
Yes. Well, so I'm just thinking that, you know, the law also written, you know, way back when for the supervisor to be practicing on the same site, you know, with the, you know, with the supervisee, you know, so if we don't address that, I think, you know, the location has to be pretty important because, you know, otherwise we basically were changing, you know, a lot of these law that, you know, for those non-exempt setting, you know, and basically allowing them to practice anywhere.
I mean, we could I'm just throwing something out here, so it could be a horrible idea, but I mean, there could be some sort of a, you know, the supervisor needs to be aware of the location where the supervisee is practicing and ensure that it's appropriate or something like that.
Right.
I'm sure that other people have other opinions, but you know, there could be, I don't know how specific or not specific we want to get. You know, there is that the supervisor is supposed to, you know, there's the standards of the profession, there's the code of ethics. They're supposed to follow all those things to ensure confidentiality and to ensure safe practice. So it's like, I guess the question is, do you want to entrust to the supervisor or do you want to be more prescriptive? But the more prescriptive you get, you know, there's all kinds of different scenarios that can come up. And it's like, whenever you try to prescribe things, you do eliminate some scenarios for some people. So I'd be interested to hear what the Susan and then what else the stakeholders have to say.
Right.
So Steve, I saw your hand first, then we'll go to Susan, and then maybe we'll go to stakeholders.
Yeah, just really quick. I mean, I don't know if we want to define it further, but I mean, right now within the supervisor's responsibility, I mean, they are, you know, supposed to monitor, what's the one here, supposed to, you know, monitor and evaluate supervisee's ability to provide services at the site or sites where he or she is practicing to a particular clientele. So we're already putting them in charge of determining, and I don't know, I understand the restrictions of, we definitely, I think the one component is you want to make sure that the supervisor might be able to address emergency situations. You can do that. I mean, we have all ways to communicate, but yeah, I don't know. I think so. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I mean, like right now we are putting them in control of determining that. And I think I have trust that they'll do that. And I think that's kind of what we should rely on. That's my personal take. So.
Susan?
Well, first of all, somebody mentioned, I can't remember, about the person who's being supervised moving out of the state, not the supervisor, but the person being supervised moving out of the state or out of the country or wherever. I mean, we're licensing people in California. The minute they move out of the state or wherever, they're no longer our responsibility. And I think the supervisor needs to notify them. I mean, that is not our responsibility. And could we put a time constraint on a supervisor who continues to supervise from out of state? Roseanne, can we do that? Like we can say supervisors who move out of state have 6 months to.
That's a possibility.
So alternate or something.
We get two things that are kind of going. I mean, we do have people from other states that are seeking California licensure, so there's not necessarily anything stopping somebody. You know, maybe somebody that in Massachusetts wants to be licensed in California and they want to seek a California license. You have that going on. You have the licensees that move out of state that still want to practice, but then you have with colleges going more online, we're finding that there's some associates registered in California that are living in another state planning to move back at some point, or they're traveling, they're on vacation, or they have a family emergency. So there's all different kinds of reasons that people are moving out of state and with different time frames on when they're coming back. So that is a really interesting question. With portability, trying to encourage portability, I think we're only going to see more of it. I think we're going to see people seeking California licensure from other states because there's a big demand for mental health services here.
If somebody is in another state seeking to become a California licensed person, are they assigned a supervisor from our state or from their state?
It would have to be a California licensee. So they would pretty much have to do remote supervision. Now, right now under the law, unless they're in an exempt setting, that pretty much gets stopped because the supervision has to be in person. We allow the associate to do therapy via telehealth, but if they're working in a private practice, they have to be meeting, with their supervisor every week. So they can't, this is going to kind of open the door to allow that sort of arrangement more, as long as the supervisor is a California licensee.
So I would like to look at, probably have in the language, I was thinking about what you said, Roseanne, that state about like the site permitted to conduct business, I maybe like just adding, in California, in the location of California, so at least we close the door about also closing the door for out of state practice. And because we discussed it a long time ago that we're not really there yet, for license portability. So if we don't specify, I think that's it just imply that they can go to Nevada, even though it's just across the state line, but then they can practice right there, which is actually for a person who's holding just the California license, it might actually violate their law, and then their supervisor is also liable. So I would rather just keep it clean for now, and just put that little parameter and say that the practice has to be in California. That's just my take.
And that would close another issue, is that if they want to do therapy with somebody, they're a California registrant in another state wanting to do therapy like with somebody in Nevada, then you have the two, California law and Nevada law, which could work. So yeah.
Yes.
And this is where we really get into the nuances, because there are people that, like, there are associates who can do telehealth that might be going home for Christmas for 2 weeks. And wanting to do therapy. So is that okay? Under current law right now, it is. Yeah, I'd be interested to discuss
under the current law, I think, yeah, at the same time, I think there's like a little temporary clause, right? Within the short time, the supervisor allowed, and yet, when you're talking about like, consistently practicing out of state, for a lengthy of time, then that's actually, not really okay, because, that comes into the issue about like, that how do you assess the emergency situation? How do you actually, is that person, practicing, within, the jurisdictions, allow, so, that's, I think that is like a, it's contingent, to what we talked about way back when, the first round of the telehealth is like, where is the, the site, the location of the therapist versus the location, of the client, so yeah, but at the same time, I think, if we, compared to not specify, I think the risk is much higher, than specifying.
Yeah, I mean, and this is also something that could go in, I mean, it might be something that needs more discussion, because I mean, we're getting into like other code sections now and what those say. It's like, so we have to figure out what we want to capture in the supervisory relationship that's on via video conferencing, and what we want to capture about what we want. I'd be interested to open it up to see what the stakeholders have to say.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, because we could sit here all day and say, well, what's an extended amount of time, right? Is it 2 weeks? Is it a month? Is it, I mean, then we're getting into arbitrary numbers again. But I agree that, that the further away they are from California for the longer amount of time, the less, the just, I don't feel that that's going to be great for their training, All right. Let's open it up to stakeholders. If you'd open, thank you, moderator.
This is the moderator. At the direction of the chair, I've opened the Q&A feature of WebEx, and we are sharing instructions on the screen. To clarify process, the Q&A is the first group of people that I will call on, and then after those people have had the chance to address the committee, I will go through the raised hands. So if you are on a computer where you can look for the question mark inside a box and type the word comment into the box and send. That will get you into the first group. If you don't have a computer and you're connecting through a mobile device, you can hit the 3-dot other options icon to find the Q&A, or you can hit *3 to raise your hand. So I do have one request for comment from Leah Brew. Leah, one moment while I send a request to unmute your microphone. And I've sent the request and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, Leah Brew, counselor educator in LPCC. So on all the stuff we talked about before, I totally agree. It's this final issue that I have most concern. I am licensed in Texas and licensed in California, and I'm maintaining both licenses. I do not think a supervisor could know what the legal codes are in another state unless they're licensed in that state. So honestly, I think the supervisor needs to be licensed in California and in the other place, if there is another place. And I think the client needs to be a California client. It's not our job to regulate clients in other locations. And in fact is probably incredibly inappropriate to say that our students, our registrants, could see clients in somebody else's state. We certainly wouldn't want other people seeing our clients, particularly because California has much more public protection or consumer protection. So I just don't, I think it's a real problem. Now, if there's a situation where somebody has to be out of town and it's temporary, maybe for less than 30 days, then you can make that work. But honestly, if it's more than 30 days, then maybe the client should find somebody local to them. I'm not too concerned about where the supervisee is. It's more about where the supervisor is able to, because they're not really, well, except for some state laws say that it's where the therapist is, not where the client is. So
15 seconds.
we have to know what states. So I think it's a bad idea other than temporary. Thank you.
And we have one more request for comment from Kathy Atkins. Kathy, I will send a request to unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Kathy Atkins from CAMT. I wanted to say CAMT, we're advocating strongly that telesupervision, as it was discussed and outlined by Roseanne, needs to get moving, be it option A or B. Given this issue needs to go to the P&A committee, possibly back to the telehealth committee, and to the full board in time for 2022 legislation. We are concerned that moving into where therapy occurs, what sites are acceptable, things of that nature will derail the conversation we've started today and the specific allowance of telesupervision. And both from conversations as well as listening to stakeholders today, I feel that the supervisees and supervisors who have testified today feel strongly about moving forward with telesupervision. And if the committee today is going to move forward in addition with defining acceptable sites, out of state, in state, work from home, things of that nature, we would have a whole separate, probably public comment with many sub issues to bring up. And like I said, I'm concerned that aspect of it derails what the committee is working on today. So we are in support of moving forward with option A or option B. We prefer option B. And we are hopeful that the committee is able to do that today and are asking for continued conversation on the site definition. And Ben Caldwell, he asked that I he had to leave quickly. He asked that I comment that he's recommending and asking for the committee to go
15
forward
seconds.
with option 2. Thank you.
And the next request for public comment is from attendee identifying as Miranda Fury. Miranda, I will unmute your microphone and you will have 2 minutes to comment.
Thank you. I really want to say I completely agree with Kathy about not slowing this process down. And I wanted to say 2 things. One, option B is definitely, more doable, but it still has problems in terms of access. If a client lives up in Shasta, for example, I'm sorry, anyways, you know what I mean. And it does open the question of what kind of hard data do you have that seeing somebody in person even one time is more effective than seeing someone through telehealth? What data, not opinion, but data do you have that's actually important? Because if you're excluding people who have access issues, you need to be able to back that up or it really does leave you open. And the other thing is, if the waiver ends October 31st, that is disastrous. There are so many clients who will have a break in treatment while people scramble to, find supervisors for the associates. There may not be enough in the area. We're already in a mental health crisis, and for the waiver to end and clients to not have access to their ongoing relationship, that is really a public health issue. So I have no idea if there's anything that the board can do about that, but if there's something someone can do about it, I'm willing to, go pop in and say hello to Newsom, because that is real. People are having a lot of issues from the pandemic alone, and to suddenly end treatment for them, or even have a stall in treatment, and that's not even talking about the loss of livelihoods for people. That's talking about consumer protection.
15 seconds.
So I really hope that there's something to be done, and if people, if BBS can't, maybe they can lobby somebody who can. Okay, thank you so much.
And I see no further request for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A?
Please, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Chris, I want to make a quick comment.
Sure.
Yeah. So I really feel that, that they have, that the urgency, of the ending of the waiver. And so, and I just want to, circle back to a little history that, we actually started this conversation quite a long time ago, and Roseanne, has been proactive enough, to really point it out that, that maybe we really needed to do something about this, because what will happen, after the waiver ended. And so we conducted the survey, which is in your, in your packet of the committee meeting today. So I think, the general, we understand the urgency. We totally understand, and so, we also, it's a hard situation because of, just how slow, when we have to introduce legislative changes. And so, I don't oppose you to, to go knock on Newsom's door and tell him that, hey, we really need to expand this waiver. I think this is a wonderful thing, to help the public, to continue, the mental health services. And so, so I think, it's a hard balance between trying to, get the right legislation so that we don't have the unintended consequences versus, also the, just trying to, revert back to where we were. And so it's a very, very hard place to be, and we understand it. And so that that we get the sentiment, and we really try to run as fast as we can. And so, and the reason why we actually have this meeting is because we want to have some language, to push it forward to PNA and then to the full board and then catch up, with the, with the legislative cycle. This is actually another emergency meeting, so that you guys know. So, just a little background and so to really demonstrate to you all that we really try our best, to do what we can.
Unfortunately, we don't have control over the waivers. That's not something that is within our purview. So yeah, if you need to knock on some doors, then that's probably the best thing. Roseanne. You're muted, Roseanne.
Sorry.
Okay.
So I hear Kathy's comment and Leah's comment about, you know, it might be a little bit too soon to discuss all of these settings and address it in this particular paragraph that we're drafting. It may be that, you know, we want to put a little more thought in it. And I also hear Leah's comment, you know, that it's like, we probably need to specify that it's the California client possibly. We get that question a lot, and it just raises a lot of issues if it's not a California client. So I think what I would suggest to allow us a little more time, but ensure that the change gets made, is I would propose moving forward with the language that we have today, but putting a sunset clause in it, like some of the stakeholders mentioned earlier. And the sunset clause should give us time to run a bill to both either extend or delete the sunset clause if things are going well, but also maybe put in some more of those setting restrictions contingent on extending the allowance for next time, so that you know, when we will already have to run legislation to do something with the sunset, and at that time we can just slide in the new requirements and extend or whatever with the sunset and go from there.
So Roseanne, now in that sense, you know, I just want to try to clarify. So now in that sense, you want to be, you know, for this, you know, with the sunset clause bill, right? Do you, you know, will will you put in a more restrictive language or not? So
No, I would not put any more restrictive language about the location at this time. I would leave that to be for the committee and stakeholders to continue to hammer that out and what that looks like. But given the urgency to move forward with this, I would suggest that we move forward with the language that we have, specifying that the language sunsets after or is effective only for a certain number until a certain date.
Right. So in that sense, what will be the reasonable sunset year? You know, because now we're looking at, you know, possibly what, sunset by 2023, you know, December, you know, give it 1 year, or, you know.
So let's just say, and this is completely hypothetical, let's just say we're successful in running urgency legislation for this. So we find somebody, and this is not a guarantee, but let's say we find a legislator that's willing to do urgency, and it moves through the legislature, and it's effective in July of, what is next year? 2022. 2022. Okay. So in the meantime, the committee works on another bill next year and is ready to run that in January 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So that would mean that as soon as that can become effective would be 2024. So I would say, I would say like it's effective until January 1, 2025. That leaves time for negotiation of the new language and any potential hiccups to be resolved, but it provides enough of incentive to you know, work within the process, because to hold accountable that, you know, we're really going to continue to work on this and not just push it off until, you know, some sunset date way out in the future.
Right.
Because it recognizes, I think, that there are other issues that need to be addressed along with that, but we can't address all of those right now to the level that we want to.
So it means that now if we don't put any restriction, you know, then one of the previous discussion about those, you know, those professional, you know, out of state clinical supervisor company, you know, will be able to, you know, basically, you know, that, you know, whether they're, you know, the supervisor is physically located in you know, in Massachusetts, once they have a California license, then they will be allowed to practice.
If they have it, yes. So if somebody right now has a California license or a California license or a California registration, and they're in another state, they can supervise. So we're not saying anything right now about where they are located.
Except that one time, that they have to meet face to face.
Yeah.
Then the rest of the not quite 3-something years. So if let's say the law in effect that within that 1 year, that they are able to do, the supervision. Okay. I just want to make it clear because that was a very, very big concern. That what does it imply, to consumer protection? I mean, it's a business. I mean, actually, I got recruited many times, through LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean, you would, if you wanted to do that and you were an associate, you would have to hold a California associate registration. You would have to have a California supervisor.
Right. But the California supervisor doesn't necessarily, be in California.
That is true.
Right. And I can actually, go back to Hong Kong where I come from and I still supervise because I have a California license.
That is true.
Yes. So Steve. Oh, I'm not the chair. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Chris.
Steve, go ahead.
Thank you. But I mean, since you have a California license and we've given you your license and you renew and you take continuing education, we're assuming that you know California laws, California practice, and everything. So where you're located, I mean, I can kind of see the argument, but you should know, if you're supervising somebody, I mean, because you're a California licensee, you should understand all our laws and such. So I don't know. I can somewhat see the argument, but I'm kind of unsure about that. So.
Well, I think that's exactly why, I would just want to make it crystal clear that, in that sense with, that because there's a sunset clause. So whatever happened, if we don't put anything, that will be the scenario. As far as they put it, because it's a new relationship. Or, if it's an old relationship, then they don't even have to meet because, if they enter the relationship at, in December 28, 2022, right, it's an established relationship, then you will have those people pretty much just, be able to supervise, the supervisor, be able to locate it, reside it out of state, to practice, to do the supervision. I just want to make it clear that this is, in that sense, that's what it meant. So I think we need to really think about what is the level of the consumer protection in that sense. Whether the supervisor, can be able to give clear enough direction for the supervisee if there's any emergency situation happen. Whether, the supervisor also have the ability, to really coach, the supervisee to respond, whether it's, regards of local resources or, the support, that the supervisee needs. So it's a very important question that we have to consider.
It is an important question, Christina, that, California is a big state. If the, if the supervisor is in, San Francisco and the supervisee is in San Diego, I mean, that's almost as far apart as being in Arizona. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds and all of it, with regards to all that. I'm thinking of Leah, as she's talking about being licensed in both Texas and California and her ability to, theoretically supervise people in Texas, while she's here in California. And I don't know how long she's been gone from Texas, right? But I know Leah, and I know that she's going to do a good job. So it's not something that worries me. So again, I think we can get caught in the weeds on this. We need to think about how to move forward with it. Roseanne?
I'd actually like to hear from Leah in terms of if she was asked to supervise somebody in Texas that was going for licensure, would she feel comfortable doing that? And do she feel like that most supervisees in other states with Texas licenses would be able to, competently do that. Leah, sorry to put you on the spot, but if you want to answer that, you can.
All
This
right,
is the
will you
mod.
please find Leah? Yeah, that's fine, Leah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, definitely.
Honestly, no way. I would not want that liability. When you think of the liability of supervising just in and of itself is pretty scary, even if it's all in person. And I have not kept up with the Texas laws in the same way, I guess beyond what I'm obligated to do, but I don't attend all the board meetings like I do with BBS. So I just it wouldn't be prudent for me personally. And I'm also someone who's not willing to take a lot of risks. But the vicarious liability is huge. And if Texas had the same law, if both Texas and California had laws that allowed me to do it, and I really wanted to do that, then I would probably do a lot of hard work to make sure I'm caught up to date on Texas law and how they change and attend all the board meetings there as well. But otherwise, we have to think about the lowest common denominator, unfortunately, and not people who are highly conscientious. So that's what's scary to me. And I have seen some supervisors who I would not want them supervising that far away.
So I have a suggestion. I know that this is going to be like, really, really hard, but I don't know if that would help, is to put a clause, something like, something about I failed to do so, that, this can constitute like unprofessional conduct, and just a little clause to, to remind, that the importance, of following, the law. And like Leah said, just have that conscience, to remind themselves that this is not just about a way of your living. This you need to take this very seriously, because if you don't do so, this is what's going to happen. So I don't know if that would help, just to, yeah.
Question. So in terms of putting something in the law we're considering today, that what would you like to say that constitutes unprofessional conduct? Like what failure to do what exactly? I guess I'm unclear on.
I'm just saying this is just one of the ideas, because when we cannot really figure it out, it's more like about a decision-making issue, right? Because it's obviously what Leah said is that, that if for the good supervisor who make good judgment, they would not do it. But it's for those, right? And so in that sense, that's why I'm just thinking is that if we put a little clause there, just to remind them, you need to take this very seriously, right? Just to remind you, you need to make a decision. That's just kind of like my line of thinking. Just being creative. I see if you want to answer my question.
No, to answer your question, I'm kind of hesitant about doing something like that. I mean, it's already kind of unprofessional conduct is there. I do see, though, I think it's one of these situations, again, I think we had a conversation a couple of years ago, but it's something about education. And I think that would be something that I would prefer to put in a education piece, not necessarily in this, what we're crafting here, but to start kind of pushing out there of, once again, and it's prime time with the supervisor regulations coming in, kind of reiterating, this is an important position. This is not just, you're not there just to, especially not just to hopefully make money, but you're there to really protect Californians, protect your supervisees, to make sure that people are, receiving great therapy. So I think it's better for an education piece, because it's it's in the law already. I mean, we have it in the regulations, and then you could be cited for unprofessional conduct, and maybe just making that more clear as we go forward with the supervision regulations and the education and those. I think that would do probably better.
and I'll piggyback on what Steve said. We do have an unprofessional conduct clause already that basically says any supervision, conduct and supervision of somebody that violates the laws of the board is unprofessional conduct. So we could take disciplinary action on a supervisor for insufficient supervision.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering if maybe we put it again. I think that we're kind of getting off into like something needs to be done, but along the lines of what Kathy said, we're not sure like quite what yet. So like if we went for the language of the sunset date, we can kind of see if any issues I mean, we've got a bunch of things happening. We're requiring, we're moving forward with the law to require some supervision training for licensees and pre-licensees. The supervision regulations are going into effect that kind of really sort of clarify, it's meant to clarify the roles of supervisor and supervisee. And then if we had this language with the January 1 sunset date of 2025, what would happen if we, with all of those things together, we monitored and kind of, as we're discussing this next year, let's kind of see what happens and what sort of issues come up. And then when we go to extend or not, or whatever, this language, we have a little bit more of an idea of what needs to be done. And we've had time to flesh out a little bit more what sort of place, you know, what am I calling them? The practice settings. Had time to like look at that a little bit deeper and see where the appropriate places in the law are to put those safeguards.
Actually, I'm totally okay with this. I think, you know, it's like any you know, any regulation, it always takes time, you know, for it to get up to speed. And so I totally see that it is a purpose that, you know, that we really needed something. And so at least we have something, and then we can continue on to, you know, to modify, you know, and to continue on that conversation, you know. But at the same time, you know, I also want to just bring up a very important point that, you know, that I think, you know, this is, you know, that whole practicing out of state and, you know, the location, it's a really, you know, it is a, you know, big elephant in the room that I think we need to talk about, you know, because it's also about the core practice of, you know, whether it's telehealth or teleconferencing, of supervision or telesupervision, like Kathy put it, you know, that it's, you know, there's still that sort of the ethical standard and the, you know, legal standard. You know, right now we just don't have a whole lot of standard. That's it. You know, so I think, you know, that would be another area that how can we, right now we permit it. And then I think the next level is how do we really set the standard to make sure that it's up to par. So I'm good.
Yeah, Roseanne, go ahead.
I agree with that. And I would actually maybe go so far as saying if this moves out of this committee today, maybe we dedicate our next committee meeting to being kind of like a stakeholders meeting where, you know, we let the different stakeholders talk about their thoughts on the allowable settings and what maybe needs to change for public protection and what's working well. And maybe we just kind of have that be the topic of our next meeting because it is such a big topic. And, you know, the legislation will be moving, assuming everything goes through the policy and advocacy and the board, you know, at that point, this piece will have moved on and we can start talking about that next piece, which I think is really kind of, there's a lot of issues we need to dive into with telehealth, but I think that this is kind of begs the next question of, all right, we're doing this, we recognize the importance, but the settings and especially out of state and where people are practicing from does need some deep consideration.
Yes. Yes. I think this is a really good compromise. Chris, you're
I was
going
going to say, I think what I'm hearing a lot is we don't know what we don't know, and until we put some of this into practice, and you know, nobody wants to take a gamble, right? But we have to start somewhere, and I think that this is a good place to start. I like, Roseanne, I like your idea of making the next meeting a stakeholder meeting, and really kind of flushing out some of these details. And if because it feels that for me, that feels like we're working kind of side by side as the legislation moves through, and then we're kind of editing it as it's going along. And then hopefully the goal, of course, being ending up with a, with a quality product we can, that we can, put our name on.
Yeah, I'd really like to see others' thoughts. I mean, I'm not just in terms of looking through, like doing research for this committee. I'm not seeing a lot of, I mean, it might be out there, I'm just not seeing it. Maybe other stakeholders know of it. I'm not seeing a lot of research on, allowing like, it's just a really like nuanced thing of supervisors supervising from another state or where, I mean, I think that all of the states are really kind of dealing with this all at once, and the research really isn't there yet because it never came out. So I'd like to know, if somebody knows of something, or what other people are thinking about this. I just don't. I mean, I can write a memo all day, but it, it's really. I think we really need to hear some other perspectives.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think that the states, everybody's struggling with this, so that's why, I kind of like put, Kara, on the spot, so I think, with that more collaborative effort too, when we learn from each other, we can definitely, like I say, we can really start really putting into this, in the standard, what really is the tele supervision is like. And it's actually a really good topic, Leah and the supervision committee way back when did such a beautiful job, to really rehash, to refine and to upgrade and improve the supervision standard. And I think this is another really important subtopic, to talk about. Right now, how do we do this via teleconferencing? So, yeah.
I would like to just give a shout out while we're talking about the supervision regs to Leah and Christy, because those were just approved last week and will be going into effect January 1st. And that was a lot of work. So excellent job to the two of you ladies.
Yes.
Big
Yes.
accomplishment.
Well, Christy and, and Leah, so this is kind of like fresh out of the oven. Haven't even published it to the, to the board yet. So, but this is really good to know, because this is like a 3-4 years work. And I think this is definitely the teleconferencing for supervision is, a continuation.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we're at the point where we're ready to.
Susan has a
Oh,
comment.
I'm sorry. Susan's not on my screen again. I apologize. Go ahead, Susan.
I was just going to say that I recommend that Roseanne, with all of the small changes that we've made in option 2, if she could rework it a little bit, including the 60 days and all of the things that we've said. And then we send that along to the Policy and Advocacy Committee, and that we decide for our next meeting that we will focus specifically on this subject of location. And I'd like to know if we have any statistics on this whole question of location. Do we know anything about the number of supervisors who are actually supervising from, let's say, out of state, or the number of trainees who are out of state applying for California licenses? Do we know any of those numbers? I mean, are we talking about an infinitesimal number of people, or are we talking about a large number of people? I don't know.
Anecdotally, I think it's becoming more common. I haven't seen any statistics. If anybody knows of any, I invite stakeholders to please send it to me, because it seems when I have tried to come across that, it just seems like it's a very niche sort of topic. I know that it's happening because I know a lot of companies out there want to expand access to supervision, and there's a lot of national stuff going on with companies doing this, but I have not really come across any great research.
And I think, just recalling what Kara.
Can you amend option 2 to include all the things that we changed?
Yes. So let me, so I think if we were going to do a motion, it would look like this. It would be direct staff to amend the option 2 language to have some amended language. It would say that well, let me just read it. Before initiating direct supervision, a supervisor must conduct an initial in-person meeting and add in within 60 days and then add in each new supervisee. So specify that it's within 60 days, specify that it's new supervisees, and then also specify a sunset date of for subdivision C of January 1, 2025. So that would be direct staff to make those changes, any non-substantive changes, and bring to the Policy and Advocacy Committee for consideration.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Right, Christina?
I will play Christina.
Oh, you know, we have to. Sorry, we have to do other comments, right? I apologize.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Are there comments from the public?
This is the moderator. At the direction of the chair, I've opened the Q&A feature, and we are inviting comments on the motion. If you'd like to make a public comment, please click the question mark icon in the lower right corner of your WebEx screen. I will take the comments submitted through the Q&A feature first, and after I have spoken with all those people, I will take raised hands. If you are on a mobile device, you can click the three-dot other options to find the Q&A button, submit the word comment. And we do have oh, no, I don't see we have any public requests for comment as yet. Oh, yes, we do. Jennifer Alley has requested. And so
This
Jennifer.
is the co-moderator. Check with Sabrina real quick, please.
Certainly.
Sabina, are you referring to me?
Yes, I think the question we're just taking comments on the motion. Is that okay?
That's correct. Yes,
Okay.
just on the motion presented.
Okay.
Okay, so Jennifer Alley, I've sent a request to unmute, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
This is Jennifer Alley with Camped. I don't have, thank you for the discussion on the motion. I think that that's something we could get behind. And I just want to, well, since I'm limited to just this, just thank you for the thoughtful discussion, but I did have a question from the discussion, but not particularly on the motion about when the next meeting would be. You guys alluded to another one, and we just don't know when that is. So thank you.
Okay, and I have a request to comment from Miranda Fury. Miranda, I have sent a request to unmute. You'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm sorry to keep ringing this bell. And I do really appreciate you moving forward with the motion. But if you're going to do the 60 days, could you put in something about accommodation for, people who have, disabilities, like some of the commenters have mentioned today? Just access is really difficult for some people, and you don't want to block them. That would be discriminatory and leaving the board open for a lawsuit. I'm not going to sue. I'm not going to sue the board. But you really want to, you don't want to have discriminatory law on your books, especially when this has been going on for years and you never required 60 days from the exempt. So you need to have a pretty good reason why you're requiring 60 days now. So I hope I'm not just annoying people or making people angry. I just, it affects me personally, but it also affects a lot of people that I know. So if you could build in accommodation, that would be unbelievably gratefully appreciated. Okay, thank you.
And we have a request for comment from Rebecca Gonzalez. Rebecca, I will send you a request to unmute, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW California. I just want to concur with the last two comments that we are fine with the amendments or the way option 2 is presented, but also have a great concern about disabilities and accommodations. Thank you.
And I see no further requests for public comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A?
Yes, please, thank you. Okay, any further discussion from the board? Okay, all right. Can we move to a vote? Is that correct? Okay, Christina? Are you there?
Are you busy there? Let's take a vote on the motion. And so I'm going to take the vote now. And Chris?
Yes.
Susan Friedman?
Yes.
And Christina Wong?
Yes.
Motion passes. Sorry there for my latency.
All right. Okay, well, then I believe that is the final agenda item for the day. I would like to thank my fellow board members, BBS staff, and all of the stakeholders and public that came to the meeting. It is 2:52, and we will be in touch with a new date for the following meeting. Is that correct? Is that we have to move next? Okay. All right. Then, unless there's anything else, then we're ready to adjourn. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Meeting is adjourned. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we will be seeing you soon.
Like
Thank you.
Monday.
Bye.
All right.